Chapter 4157. After a series of angry roars, the group of immortal realm old monsters, who had learned the truth, retreated immediately. They all turned around and rushed into the planar wormholes behind them, returning to their respective clans and forces to report the news. However, only one of the races and forces that had sent 2 immortal realm experts to the Myriad Luo Federation returned. The other immortal realm expert rushed to the spacious space tunnel in the Shadow Devil star zone of the second universe without hesitation and entered that place at once. The mysterious desolate world. Since then, the news of the arrival of a mysterious desolate world in the second universe had been completely leaked. Everyone in the 3 universes knew about it, and the 3 universes moved together. Countless races and forces, big and small, were all boiling with excitement. The moment they received the news, they issued a clan order to mobilize urgently. The first universe. Except for the demon race, which had never shown up since the second generation of the demon race took them away with a ray of light when the demon emperor star had undergone a shocking change, all the other races started to mobilize like crazy. A large number of spaceships, fortresses, and fortresses of various sizes were gathered together. The other 3 races of the alliance of the 4 races, namely the Hell Ant race, the Space Rat race, and the Giant Ferocious race, had gathered an army of 10 million spaceships in just one day. They were heading to the Giant Ferocious race, which was the closest to the demon race. After the army of 10 million was gathered, it would be led by the 6 immortal realm old monsters sent by the 3 races to the frontier of the demon race. They would rush to the second universe through the plane-level wormhole that led to the first universe. In addition, the Myriad Race Alliance, which was formed by the former slave races of the first universe, was also gathering an army quickly. All the races, which had a total of more than 20 million, were gathering at the edge of the demon race star zone near the central area of the first universe. The commanders of the Myriad Race Alliance this time were 10 immortal realm old monsters from the various races of the Alliance. At the same time, while the army of the races of the first universe was gathering, the 2 camps of the human race and the Myriad Luo Federation in the third universe were doing the same. They were gathering their forces and deploying their troops in an orderly manner. The Myriad Luo Federation Senate was the fastest. On the second day after the news came from the second universe, an army of 10 million spaceships was gathered at the station planets of the Federation military in the undying star zone of the Demon Race star zone. They headed for the Tomb of the Fallen star zone immediately. The Federation fleet, which had 10 million spaceships, was led by 5 immortal realm old monsters. Yi, of the tomb of the human race of the human race, of the human of the demon race of the human race of the human race of Long Shantang. He was familiar with Yi Xian, and he was also part of the fleet. As for the human clan's Tenju Celestial Palace, there were 6 immortal realm old monsters, including Gong Huaji, and the strongest one was Elder Gong Su Ho of Tianju Celestial Palace. 10 Extreme Celestial Palace dispatched an army of 10 million spaceships and battleships. Since the territory controlled by the Self-Cultivator camp was further away from the Tomb of the Fallen star zone, it had already been 10 million immortal realm days. The army of 10 million immortal realm old monsters had just entered the territory of the Science and Technology camp when the army of Heaven Extreme Celestial Palace had just set off for the Tomb of the Fallen star zone. 2 days later, the first fleet of the Federation arrived in the domain of the graveyard of the domain of the falling stars. After entering the depths of the domain of the falling stars, they rushed directly into the plane-level wormhole that led to the second universe. Half a day later, the immortal army that was chasing after them arrived. They followed closely behind and rushed into the wormhole. Soon, they disappeared. The army of Heaven Extreme Celestial Palace that had come from afar entered the wormhole 2 days later. At this point, the army of 30 million spaceships gathered by the 2 human camps and the Myriad Luo Federation in the third universe, as well as the 16 immortal realm old monsters, including the 3 marquises, had all left this realm and embarked on their journey to the second universe. In addition to these 3 top forces, there were many weaker sects, families, and forces in the third universe. Even rogue cultivators had flocked to the second universe from various star zones in the past few days. After arriving in the Tomb of the Fallen star zone, they directly entered the wormhole and rushed to the second universe. It was because this opportunity was too tempting. Everyone wanted to go and try their luck. Who knows, they might be able to come across a great opportunity. The second universe. It had been 3 days since the netherworld furnace had arrived from the first universe without any warning. The netherworld furnace, which was as powerful as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood, had passed through the spacious starry passage in the domain of Shadow Devil and entered the mysterious desolate world inside the passage. Following the netherworld furnace were several immortal realm old monsters from various races in the first universe and the third universe, as well as the myriad Luo Federation Senate. After that, various races in the second universe, who were shocked by what had happened, swarmed into action. Except for the netherworld tortoise clan, which had been completely sealed off, the other 9 races in the top 10, as well as some other races that were ranked higher, each sent one or more immortal realm old monsters out of their ancestral lands. They all rushed into the mysterious desolate world one after another. As for the second batch of spaceships that had been gathered in these races, they basically all set off the next day and followed the first batch of spaceships into the mysterious desolate world. However, because the overall strength of the races in the second universe was uneven, the number of spaceships that entered the mysterious desolate world varied. For example, the races in the top 10, such as the Blood Flood Dragon clan, had all gathered an army of more than 5 million spaceships. Even the smaller ones maintained a scale of more than 1 million. The total number of spaceships gathered by all the races in the second universe was more than 70 to 80 million. It was not all of them, but it was more or less the same. Counting in such a way, in just a few days, the total number of starships of all kinds gathered by the major clans and forces in the 3 main planes of the universe had reached a terrifying scale of almost 200 million. It was definitely an astounding number. In the past tens of thousands of years, such a situation had never happened before. Chapter 4158. By the time Yi Xian arrived at the Shadow Devil Galaxy of Universe 2 with his plane-level interstellar coordinate jump ability, there were already many battleships from various races of Universe 2 shuttling back and forth in space outside the mysterious primordial world, patrolling the area. However, this starry passage was simply too vast. It was more than 20 million kilometers away. After Yi Xian activated the perfect vibration of his mental energy secret technique, he was able to easily sneak in without anyone noticing. After entering the mysterious primordial world, an extremely familiar aura of the primordial world immediately assaulted his senses. Yi Xian was not in a hurry to go deeper. Instead, he remained in a concealed state as he observed and explored the outer regions. From the outside, the starry passage leading into the mysterious primordial world looked like a giant cosmic black hole. The primordial world inside the black hole was obviously extremely deep, with no end in sight. After entering, the feeling of being deep and distant grew even stronger. Almost as soon as he entered, Yi Xian was more or less certain of one thing. This mysterious primordial world was very likely the core star region of the great battle of the primordial world. At the very least, it was extremely close. This was because even in the outer regions of this fragment of the primordial world, there were a large number of corpses of primordial beasts that he had never seen before floating in the void. Golden griffins, blue-eyed golden eagles, 9-tailed coxcomb snakes, 3-headed bone serpents, red phosphorus twin-tailed serpents, blood moon wolves, dark purple star wolves, yellow lightning wolves, amethyst behemoths, 5-colored divine oxen, gold moon true toads, blood jade spiders, 6-winged heavenly demonic insects, blue-eyed golden-eyed beasts, blood-eyed demonic apes, purgatory blood phoenixes, purple gold beasts, dragon pythons. Wait a minute. It was safe to say that all kinds of bizarre primordial species, birds, and beasts that had long been unseen in the current era could be found here. It was too much for the eye to take in. He even saw a slender silver dragon. Its body was thin and slender, and it was at least 1 million meters long. Its slender tail looked like a long whip, and there was a pair of ferocious horns behind its jaw and behind its eyes. Its wings could reflect light like mirrors, giving off a metallic texture. There was also a black dragon. Its body was so huge that it was even bigger than the silver dragon that was 1 million meters long. It was over 200,000 feet long. His terrifyingly enormous dragon body was covered in solid, black, metallic scales that did not pass through any light. He also had a pair of pupils that were as black as almonds, and countless brilliant golden threads that were thinner than hair were embedded in his dark irises. Judging from their auras, the silver dragon and black dragon were clearly supreme existences of the primordial era. Their battle prowess was second only to the golden divine dragon, the void tortoise, and the primordial yiksha. Even the corpses of the fallen primordial grand cultivators could be seen. How could it be at the edge of the great battle in the past? According to this inference, if everything was true, it was very likely that there was an even greater surprise and fortune in the depths of this collapsed corner of the ancient world. However, Yi Xian did not immediately leave to explore. He decided to collect as many corpses of the primordial grand cultivators that were lying in the void in the peripheral area first. Then, he would go deeper. This matter had to be done cleverly. After all, even outside the starry sky passage, one could vaguely see the general situation of the shattered world inside the black hole through the vast passage that looked like a giant black hole. If Yi Xian collected all the corpses of the primordial grand cultivators in the void, it would definitely attract attention, and he would probably be exposed. In fact, long before he arrived, the various races of the second universe had each sent a fleet to explore this place. The commanders were basically all immortal realm old monsters. Right now, they were scattered in the peripheral area, trying to collect the corpses of the primordial grand cultivators lying in the void. If Yi Xian's actions were too obvious, he would be discovered at the first possible moment. Although he wasn't afraid, his original plan to hide in the dark and silently make a fortune would probably die prematurely. The depth of this desolate ancient world fragment was unknown, but the diameter or width of its periphery was about 400 to 500 million miles. Not every part of the boundless periphery was full of corpses of the primordial grand cultivators. All in all, the corpses of the primordial grand cultivators were mostly concentrated in the central area of the periphery. There were also corpses on the edges, but they were sparse and not dense. Also, the corpses of the primordial grand cultivators at the edges of the periphery were much weaker. Their auras were clearly weaker. Yi Xian's goal was to find the remains of the primordial life treasure that were located in the center of the outer region, within a radius of 100 million kilometers. Of course, he couldn't take them all away. He could only choose the larger ones with stronger auras and move them away. There were around 2 million corpses of the primordial grand cultivators in the central area. Judging from their auras, the weakest of them were Star Lords, and the strongest were primordial grand cultivators. As for the primordial grand cultivators like the golden divine dragon, Yi Xian didn't see any of them. Even if there were, they should be further ahead. As a matter of fact, there weren't too many corpses of the primordial grand cultivators. After a quick glance, Yi Xian estimated that there were around 300 corpses. 300 corpses was indeed a small proportion compared to the total number of corpses of the primordial grand cultivators. However, the corpses of the primordial grand cultivators were too valuable. It was already surprising that there were more than 300 of them. After all, the corpses of such treasures in Yi Xian's possession, including those obtained from the mysterious void where the void tortoise was hibernating, only amounted to 13 primordial sovereigns, more than 200 primordial sovereigns, and more than 200 primordial sovereigns and below. There were less than 500 corpses of the primordial grand cultivators above the immortal level. This time, the target that Yi Xian had chosen was also at the immortal realm. He couldn't be bothered to collect those below the immortal realm, and even if he did, he would only be able to fill the stomachs of the primordial turtle and the primordial porcupine and the other foodies, although his strength had soared recently, and his original body had reached the universe level 1. It was obviously impossible for him to collect the corpses of those above the immortal level with his own strength. As for the corpses of the emperors, and primordial grand cultivators, it was needless to say. Just getting close to them would probably cause him to explode from the terrifying pressure. Chapter 4159. Yi Xian's spiritual energy was perfectly vibrating, and his level had already reached the advanced level. His personal strength had also reached the universe grade. Under such circumstances, after he used this secret technique, ordinary undyings who were only one level higher than him couldn't detect him at all. There were no traces at all. Only marquee-level undyings would be able to detect him if they investigated carefully. At this moment, although there were more than a dozen undyings in this desolate ancient fragment, there wasn't a single marquee-level undyings. But even so, Yi Xian didn't plan on picking an obvious target from the very beginning. Instead, he quietly circled around to a less conspicuous area and started with the remains of the Immortal Realm treasure. With a thought, he secretly took away one of them and sent it into the Shinong cauldron within his body. Instantly. After that, he carefully made a few moves to test the power of the Shinong cauldron in his body. He used the method of telekinesis to take these undyings away, and the furthest he could go. After attacking more than 10 times, Yi Xian had a rough idea of what was going on. With such a method of telekinesis, the furthest distance he could maintain between him and the target was obviously affected by the target's cultivation level and was not constant. The stronger the energy of the undyings, the closer the distance he had to maintain in order to successfully take them away. Otherwise, if he was too far away, he wouldn't be able to move them at all. The furthest distance he could maintain when taking an undyings was about 10,000 miles. Marquis-level undyings were about 9,000 miles. Emperor-level undyings were 8,000 miles. Emperor-level undyings were 7,000 miles. Emperor-level undyings were 6,000 miles. As for what was above Emperor level, Yi Xian didn't know at all. However, for those undyings that were stronger than Emperor-level undyings but weren't that strong, he could take them away with telekinesis. The furthest distance he could maintain was about 5,000 miles. As for the remains of the Supreme Being of the Primordial Era, if Yi Xian wanted to collect them, even if he fully activated the domain power of the Shinong Cauldron within his body, he would only be able to succeed within 1,000 miles of his target. After confirming the furthest distance to absorb the corpses of the various levels of treasures, Yi Xian took a deep breath. Without any hesitation, he began to wantonly plunder them. Often, in the blink of an eye, the remains of a certain primordial life treasure that was originally floating in the air were quietly taken away by him and sent into the undying world within his body. Inside the Shinong Cauldron, at first, he only collected the corpses of the 5 Immortal Realm warriors and made a fortune silently. In less than half a day, he had collected more than 1,000 corpses of the Immortal Realm warriors. More than 1,000 corpses of the 5 great realms of the Immortal Realm were a tremendous amount of top-grade flesh and blood. It sounded like a lot, but it was nothing compared to the nearly 2 million corpses in the Central Territory. As long as they were collected in a staggered manner, they wouldn't show their worth. Because it was very difficult to be detected. Since the progress was so smooth, Yi Xian gradually relaxed and began to look at the corpses of the Immortal Realm warriors in the void. There were only about 300 corpses of this level of Immortal Realm warriors, and they were all extremely large in size. Compared to the corpses of the other levels, they were obviously more eye-catching. If they were so large, they would disappear just like that. If they weren't careful, they would be very likely to be discovered by the exploration fleets of the various races in the second universe wandering around the void, especially those Immortal Realm warriors who were either guarding the fleets or wandering in the void. These guys were at a loss. They had been in this place for a few days, and there were so many corpses of the Immortal Realm warriors in front of them and in the surrounding void. However, from the beginning to the end, they could only collect the corpses of the Star Lord, Domain Lord, and Sector Lord warriors. Even the Immortal Realm warriors had a very low success rate in collecting the corpses of the ordinary Immortal Realm warriors. As for the corpses of the Immortal Realm warriors above the Immortal Realm warriors, no one had successfully collected a single one in the past few days. Not to mention the Immortal Realm warriors. Even the Immortal Realm warriors couldn't get too close to the corpses of the Immortal Realm warriors. The pressure was too strong, and there was the danger of exploding. There was a treasure mountain in front of them, but they could only look on anxiously. Encountering such a situation was already frustrating enough. Under such circumstances, if they found out that Yi Xian easily collected the corpses of the Immortal Realm warriors, the Immortal Realm warriors present would probably be so angry. They might even vomit blood from anger. Among the 300 corpses of the Immortal Realm warriors, the 2 silver dragons and the black dragon were the largest. They were shining brightly and were too eye-catching. Although Yi Xian was moved and even envious, he didn't dare to make a move, at least not now. After thinking for a while, he chose a blood jade spider of the Immortal Realm warrior level as his first target. The main reason was that its body was slightly smaller, only about 100 zhang in size. It wasn't too eye-catching, so the risk was almost zero. Relying on the protection of the farmer god Cauldron's domain, Yi Xian carefully approached the blood jade spider within 1,000 li of the blood jade spider's corpse. After looking around and confirming that there weren't any immortal realm warriors paying attention to this area, he activated the farmer god Cauldron's domain with all his strength. After locking onto the blood jade spider, he quickly took action and directly collected it. The whole process was completed in a short tenth of a breath's time. Because of the farmer god Cauldron's domain, this blood jade spider disappeared into thin air without leaving any traces. It was directly sent into the treasure cauldron in Yi Xian's undying world. After a successful attempt, Yi Xian's spirit was greatly boosted. Needless to say, this sort of feeling was truly extraordinarily wonderful. Just like this, under the eyes of a group of eternal realm old monsters, he silently took away the treasures that they wanted but couldn't obtain, and he was even able to enjoy their extremely anxious yet helpless embarrassment. This matter wasn't just exciting, it was also moving. Kuang Shini was so beautiful that she was practically bubbling. After that, Yi Xian attacked several times in succession. In a short few hours, he successfully collected the corpses of the Golden Moon True Toad, the Blood Jade Spider, the six-winged heavenly demon insect, and hundreds of other treasures of the primordial era. Of course, these were all relatively small existences, under 1,000 zhang in size, so no accidents happened. Unknowingly, there were only 300 or so immortal realm warriors' corpses in the void, and more than a third of them were collected by him. However, at this time, there were no more small targets. This also meant that the next collection would be much more risky. Chapter 4160. For the next day or so, Yi Xian had been wantonly collecting the remains of various primordial creatures. Including the previous harvest, after 1.5 days, he had collected more than 10,000 remains of primordial creatures in the Shen Nong Cauldron, and all of them were above the immortal rank. Among them, there were more than 200 remains of primordial powerful beings. In total, there were more than 300 remains of primordial powerful beings. Among them, the small ones below 10,000 feet, and the medium ones between 10,000 feet to 10,000 feet had all been collected by him. Now, there were only a few hundred remains of the primordial powerful beings that were more than 10,000 feet in size. In the central region of the outer region, there were a total of more than 2 million remains of various types. Yi Xian collected more than 10,000 of them. It sounded like a lot, but in reality, it was only less than 1% of the total. Moreover, Yi Xian was staggered in his collection and did not focus on one area. In addition, the vanguard exploration fleets of the various races of the Second Universe that had entered this place had been busy collecting some Star Lord, Domain Lord, and even Sector Lord level targets. The number of treasure body remains in the void had been slowly decreasing, so his movements weren't seen through. Of course, this was also because he had always adhered to the principle of being cautious. Otherwise, no matter how few remains he collected, he would have been exposed long ago. Right now, more than 10,000 corpses of treasures above the immortal rank had been successfully collected, and Yi Xian had chosen the most valuable one. Even though there were still a lot of corpses in the air, most of them were existences below the immortal rank, so he didn't have much interest in them. After some consideration, he decided to collect the last few hundred remains of the primordial powerful beings that were more than 10,000 feet in size. Then, he left the outer region and entered deeper into the void of the primordial world fragment to look for other fortunes and opportunities. Although there were only a little over 100 of them left, they were all large treasured corpses that were over 100,000 feet in size. Once he collected them, the risk factor was so high that it even surpassed the sum of the 10,000 treasured corpses he had collected before. Realizing this, Yi Xian became even more careful. Not long after, he chose his target and immediately approached it quietly, maintaining a distance of less than 1,000 miles from his target. This time, his target was a purgatory blood phoenix. Although it could not be compared to the silver dragon and black dragon that were 100,000 feet and 200,000 feet in size, its size was not small. It was more than 30,000 feet, which was equivalent to 100,000 meters, which was equivalent to a starry sky fortress. If such a big fellow suddenly disappeared, the possibility of being detected was very high. In order to ensure that nothing went wrong, Yi Xian waited for an entire meal before instantly making his move at a perfect time. He activated the power of the Shinnon Cauldron's internal domain and stored the Purgatory Blood Phoenix into the cauldron in the blink of an eye. As soon as all this was completed, in a void that was only hundreds of thousands of miles away from him, an immortal old monster from an unknown clan in the second universe seemed to have sensed something. He subconsciously turned his head and glanced at the area where Yi Xian was. Fortunately, it was a close call. This immortal old monster might have sensed something, but it was obviously very weak and hazy. After turning his head and glancing at this side, he quickly moved his eyes away. He did not investigate carefully, nor did he notice that there was a Purgatory Blood Phoenix's remains that were missing from the primordial powerful beings. With a long sigh of relief, Yi Xian felt lucky. He quickly changed to another area and approached the second target more carefully. In this way, another day passed in the blink of an eye. At the same time, he had collected more than 10,000 remains of various creatures from the primordial era. But in the following day, he had successfully collected and sent into the internal space of the Shinnon Cauldron, but there were only less than 30 remains of powerful beings from the primordial era. Compared with the two, the efficiency was simply too low. But fortunately, everything went smoothly. Until now, Yi Xian's actions had not been detected by any immortal old monster. However, even Yi Xian knew that it was only a matter of time before he was discovered, and it was basically coming. After all, in the central area of this area, there were only about 300 powerful beings from the primordial era. Now, the number had been sharply reduced to only about 70. If such a strange situation was not discovered, it would be really strange. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that there were only about a dozen immortal old monsters in the surrounding void, and that they basically did not rush around in the past 2.5 days. Instead, they stayed close to the remains of a powerful being from the primordial era, or a quasi-primordial era. They were concentrating on deducing and trying various methods to collect the remains. The inexplicable disappearance of more than 200 powerful beings from the primordial era had probably been discovered long ago. After a short while, Yi Xian came to the remains of a powerful being from the primordial era, a golden griffin. After waiting for more than 2 hours, when the time came, he immediately took action again without hesitation. In the blink of an eye, he had successfully collected the golden griffin into his body. The Shinnon Cauldron. However, this time, the expected exposure had finally arrived. Just as Yi Xian took action to collect the golden griffin, in a void millions of miles away from where he was, an immortal old monster happened to turn his head and look in this direction. He happened to see the strange scene of the golden griffin disappearing into thin air. Facing such a strange scene, this immortal old monster with a lion-like nose obviously felt a little confused. He even raised his hand to rub his eyes. Finally, when he fixed his eyes and confirmed that the golden griffin had really disappeared, he realized that something big had happened. His expression changed, and he turned his head to look in other directions in the void. This time, the lion-nosed immortal old monster was so shocked that his body trembled several times, and the expression on his face changed continuously. In less than half a breath, his face was as black as ink. In his mouth, there was a roar full of indignation and dissatisfaction. He suddenly howled, "Damn it, in just a day or two, how come there are only 70 or so remains of the more than 300 powerful beings from the primordial era in the void? Who did it? Eating alone without a word, such an appetite, big, such a vicious mouth, this is not king thing." As this thunderous roar suddenly sounded, more than a dozen immortal old monsters, who were guarding the remains of a treasure in the distance, carefully studying and deducing the collection strategy, were suddenly alarmed. With a suspicious look on their faces, they turned their heads to look, and then they were slightly confused. Chapter 4161. With the roars and roars coming from all directions in the void, Yi Xian's heart skipped a beat. He quickly retreated, leaving the place where the golden griffin he had just collected was originally located. Almost in the next moment, the powerful divine senses of more than a dozen immortal old monsters covered the sky and earth. It was as if they were sweeping through this corner of the void, constantly probing and searching. Although Yi Xian was sure that with his current cultivation strength, he would definitely not be detected by the ordinary immortal old monsters who were only one realm higher than him by activating the high-level perfect vibration of the spiritual power's secret technique. But now, after all, there were more than a dozen immortal old monsters' powerful divine senses sweeping over at the same time. If there was a mistake, there would be no way to recover. With this cautious thought, Yi Xian retreated for more than 10 million miles before he stopped in relief. His face darkened, and he looked at the lion-nosed immortal old monster who had roared first. Although he had long known that the risk factor of every move he made would continue to increase, it was only a matter of time before he was finally exposed. But even so, when he was really exposed by the lion-nosed immortal old monster, Yi Xian couldn't help but feel very unhappy. It could even be said that he was so depressed that he was almost angry. It was all this red-headed, big-nosed old man's fault. Otherwise, he could have collected more than 10 or 20 corpses before he was exposed. But now, this matter had been exposed. The remaining 70 or so corpses of the primordial old monsters that he hadn't collected in time would definitely be firmly held by the dozen immortal old monsters. If he wanted to make a move again, not only would the success rate plummet, but even the risk of being caught on the spot and exposed would instantly soar by countless times. After all, his perfect vibration of the spiritual power's secret technique only perfectly concealed all the aura and traces of existence of Yi Xian. Although it couldn't be detected, he still existed. There were more than 10 immortal old monsters here. If they really found his approximate location, they would surround him and surround him. There were people surrounding him, and it was extremely likely that they would be able to find Yi Xian. It could be said that in this situation, the last 70 or so primordial supreme being level corpses were no longer suitable to be used. Once they reached out, there was at least a 40% chance that they would be surrounded. Thinking of this, Yi Xian immediately felt dejected, and a strong sense of unwillingness rose in his heart. These were the remains of top treasures from the primordial era. Each of them was a priceless treasure. Moreover, it wasn't just one or two of them, but more than 70 of them. Giving them up like this would cause him great heartache. After pondering for a while, Yi Xian's mind suddenly flashed with a bright light. A bold idea gradually emerged in his mind. Out of caution, he forcefully suppressed the excitement in his heart and calmed his state of mind. He carefully deduced for a while before finally confirming that this method was feasible, and his spirits were instantly refreshed. Hee, old man, who told you to ruin this Star Lord's good deed? You asked for it, so don't blame this Star Lord for being so insidious. As he inwardly cursed, Yi Xian turned around and looked towards the void that was thousands of kilometers to the right. His gaze fell onto the lion-nosed immortal who had ruined his plans. As he sized him up, a mischievous smile slowly appeared on the corner of his mouth, and it became more and more intense. As soon as he finished speaking, Yi Xian's figure flashed once more, avoiding the 10 or so immortal realm old monsters that were roaring and roaring in the surrounding space. He took a big circle and quickly approached the lion-nosed immortal realm old monster. After a while, when he stopped again, he was already behind the lion-nosed undying, about 7,000 miles away. Afterwards, Yi Xian's gaze passed by the back of the lion-nosed immortal and landed on the remains of a treasure body 600 to 700 kilometers in front of him. As for the aura of this treasure body, it was at the level of an immortal emperor. If Yi Xian activated the domain of the Shen Nong cauldron within him to absorb the emperor-level treasure body into the cauldron space, he had to ensure that the distance between him and the target was no more than 8,000 miles. Right now, he was coincidentally within that distance, 7,000 miles. He could successfully absorb the treasure and also increase the distance between him and the lion-nosed undying. The moment he made a move, the chances of him successfully retreating from this area would be maximized. Right now, the 10 undying in this space fragment were all from the various races of the second universe. It was inevitable for them to be suspicious of each other. And they were all normal undyings, they could only absorb normal undyings, and the success rate wasn't very high. As for higher-level treasures, not to mention Emperor-level undyings, even official-level undyings couldn't be absorbed. Previously, these dozen or so immortal realm old monsters had all been guarding the remains of a high-level treasure. They were focused on deducing and experimenting with all sorts of methods in order to find a way to collect a higher-level target. If not for that, they wouldn't have only noticed Yi Xian's actions at this moment. What Yi Xian needed to do now was to take away the remains of the immortal emperor-ranked treasure that was several hundred kilometers in front of this lion-nosed immortal. And to do so, he had to do it openly. Simply put, the moment the target was absorbed and the moment it shot towards the lion-nosed undying, he had to intentionally reveal a flaw in the domain of the Shin-known cauldron, allowing the other 10 undyings to see through it. The undyings could clearly see through it. Afterwards, when the target passed by the lion-nosed immortal's body and shot towards Yi Xian's location, he quickly concealed this flaw that he had intentionally revealed. If he did that, the other 10 undyings in the surrounding space would only see the emperor-level treasure body flying towards the lion-nosed undying and disappearing right in front of him. However, they wouldn't be able to see the trajectory of the treasure body flying towards Yi Xian and being absorbed into the Shin-known cauldron within him. With one look, it was obvious that the corpse had been taken away by the lion-nosed undying. This was the remains of an undying emperor-level treasure. None of the other undying old monsters could move it, but only he could do it. Just this alone was enough to make the other undying old monsters think of many things. For example, if he could absorb an emperor-level undyings, why couldn't he absorb a desolate-level undyings? This was clearly because he had some sort of secret technique, or had some sort of special treasure. Once this thought appeared in the bottom of his heart, even if he didn't have any strong evidence, it was impossible for him to easily dispel it in a short time. In short, this big black pot was definitely going to be the lion-nosed immortal. The more than 200 corpses of the primordial almighty treasures that had mysteriously disappeared would all be counted. Chapter 4162. At this moment, after Yi Xian secretly made a move, he quickly left and dodged to the distance in another direction. In the space around the lion-nosed immortal, angry roars and roars instantly sounded out. The dozen or so undying beings from the various races of the second universe roared and charged at the lion-nosed undying being, who had a stunned expression on his face. "Old lion monster, you are really generous. You actually hid it from all of us." "That's right. It's fortunate that you were the first one to notice the abnormality. After all this time, it turns out that it was a thief crying thief. If it weren't for the fact that I was itching to make a move and was caught red-handed, we would have been fooled by you. You're so greedy. You're so greedy. Old lion, tell us the secret method you used to collect the remains of the supreme primordial era treasures. Let's share it." In addition, the 200 or so remains of the supreme primordial era treasures you secretly collected must be taken out as well. Let's share them equally. Hurry up and take them out. Otherwise, don't blame me for turning against you." In the blink of an eye, more than a dozen immortal realm old monsters had approached. All of them were furious, and their eyes were extremely unfriendly. Some even said that they were extremely fierce. After all, they were all undying old monsters of their own races. When had they ever been fooled like this? Besides, the race behind the lion-nosed undying old monster was not very powerful in the second universe. Although they were not ranked below the top 100, they were at the bottom of the top 100 races. At present, more than a dozen immortal realm old monsters were roaring, and half of them were from the top 10 of the second universe. Although they were all immortal realm cultivators, the strength of the clans behind them was deep, so they naturally had more confidence. The lion-nosed undying old monster had no doubt that if he couldn't give them an explanation today, the dozens of undying old monsters would definitely attack him without hesitation. They might even tear him apart alive. Thinking of this, the lion-nosed undying old monster was so shocked that he trembled and almost burst into tears. Friends, can't we just talk it out? This is really **King misunderstanding. This old man is being wrongly accused. Hey, old lion, you're still trying to quibble with the evidence. That's right. I saw the remains of the undying old monster turn into a beam of light and rush toward you. It didn't disappear until it was right in front of you. If you didn't collect it, could it be that it chased after you automatically? Old lion monster, we saw this with our own eyes. Beside you and even in the void far away, there was no second figure other than you. Under such circumstances, you still want to deny it? Do you really think we can be bullied? Roar. Don't talk nonsense with him. Since he doesn't know what's good for him, just suppress him. Everyone, let's attack him together. We don't have much time. We have to collect the remains in the void. Where? You. And let. Seeing that his explanation was useless, the lion-nosed undying old monster wasn't stupid. He couldn't just stand there and wait to be suppressed. He saw that the undying old monsters were getting closer and closer. Not only did they not listen to his explanation, they even shouted the word suppress and kill. Such a scene made the lion-nosed undying old monster's face turn pale. He didn't dare to stay any longer. He turned around and started to escape. In such a situation, he had no choice but to escape. Being the scapegoat was better than being suppressed and losing his life, right? In this way, the super big black pot that had just been put on his head was undoubtedly confirmed. The dozen or so immortal realm old monsters that were swarming in the void were completely furious. While chasing in the void, they kept roaring, and the entire void of the universe was slightly trembling. 10 immortal realm old monsters, who were swarming in the void, were completely enraged. The consequences of several undying old monsters going berserk at the same time were very serious. If they didn't handle it well, the void would collapse. All of this took a long time to describe, but in fact, it only took a few breaths of time. In this vast void, in addition to the dozen or so immortal realm old monsters from the various races of the second universe, there were also dozens of vanguard exploration fleets of various races. The scale was not small. These starships and more powerful beings of various races were busy collecting the remains of the Cosmic Lord, Domain Lord, and Sector Lord treasures in the void. At this moment, the sudden change of events made the space tremble with the roars of more than a dozen immortal realm old monsters. All of them were startled and fled in all directions, trying to avoid the immortal realm old monsters who were chasing and escaping in circles. They didn't want to be caught in the crossfire. In the blink of an eye, the entire universe was in chaos. However, not all of the undying beings were convinced that the lion-nosed undying being was the culprit. Among the 10 or so undying beings, 3 or 4 of them quickly regained their composure. Although they were still chasing the lion-nosed undying being, their roars had disappeared. Instead, they were warning the lion-nosed undying being. The lion-nosed undying old monster and the other undying old monsters had calmed down. This wasn't the result that Yi Xian wanted. If these undying old monsters really calmed down, he wouldn't have the chance to take the remaining 70 or so undying old monster corpses. Thinking of this, Yi Xian didn't hesitate any longer. His figure dashed out, and while carefully maintaining a perfect concealment of his aura, he quickly approached an area that was only 7,000 to 8,000 kilometers away from the lion-nosed immortal. He hung around him like a tail, waiting for an opportunity to attack again. Soon, the chance came. At this moment, the undying old monster's words seemed to have worked. The other undying old monsters who were chasing the lion-nosed undying old monsters all slowed down after a slight hesitation. Seeing this, the lion-nosed undying old monster who was running away let out a sigh of relief. He paused and stopped. He looked around and quickly chose an undying old monster corpse that was about 100 miles away. Fellow friends, let me explain this matter slowly. That body wasn't mine. I've been wronged. If you don't believe me, just look at it. Isn't that just an emperor body? I'll take it now and prove it. You'll know once you see. Just as he finished speaking, the lion-nosed undying being had already made his move. His aura surged out from his body, and one could feel it even with their eyes closed. It was definitely not just for show. Seeing this, Yi Xian grinned. He was waiting for the best chance, but he didn't expect the lion-nosed undying old monster to be so considerate. Since he was so cooperative, if he didn't make a move now, it would be unreasonable. Chapter 4163. Silence. A deathly silence. Just a moment ago, the other dozen or so undying old monsters almost believed his words when they saw the lion-nosed undying being speak so confidently and even prove it on the spot. At this moment, the remains of the Emperor Immortal turned into a ray of light as the lion-nosed immortal waved his hand. The dozen or so immortal old monsters and even more immortal experts in the surrounding void all gaped in shock. Their mouths were agape, everyone's face was filled with a sluggish expression in an instant, as if they had just been struck by lightning. Even the lion-nosed undying himself was completely petrified, staring blankly at the right hand that was still raised, his mind rumbling non-stop. This time, Yi Xian still removed the concealment effect of the field within the Shinong cauldron from the moment the target was captured until the distance in front of the lion-nosed immortal cultivator's body. He purposely revealed a flaw so that everyone in the distant void could see it clearly. Immediately after, the instant the treasure body's remains arrived in front of the lion-nosed immortal, Yi Xian quickly adjusted the power of the Shinong cauldron's domain and concealed the flaws that he had intentionally revealed earlier. This scene was the focus of everyone's attention. Everyone in the space witnessed that this emperor-level treasure body was easily taken away by the lion-nosed undying in one move. Something's not right. Something's not right. Which bastard is trying to harm me? Come out now. I just raised my hand and you're up to no good. What kind of grudge do you have against me? Whoa, why are you targeting this old man? After being stunned for a while, the lion-nosed undying regained his senses and his face turned green. He jumped and cursed while looking at the dozen or so undying old monsters in the distance. This time, he was really about to cry. He frowned as if he had just been hit by frost. Everyone, please don't be fooled by appearances. I did try to take it away again, but I didn't succeed. What you saw wasn't done by me. You've gone too far. Old lion monster, if I don't kill you today, I won't rest. You've gone too far, you're treating me like a monkey. What's the point of wasting time with him? Let's do it, everyone. The moment the lion-nosed undying finished, the dozen or so undyings in the distance all roared in anger. This time, even the ones who had advised both sides to stay calm were furious, gritting their teeth. Even though they didn't say anything, they were the first to charge out towards the lion-nosed undying. We're finished, all our mouths are useless. Seeing this, the lion-nosed undying almost crumbled on the spot. In despair, he didn't even have the will to explain himself. He turned and fled without another word. Rumble. Rumble. After being toyed with and humiliated twice in a row, the undyings of various races who didn't know the truth felt as though their chests were about to explode. Even their pursuit this time was completely different from before. As they chased in space, they didn't hesitate to attack from time to time. Even if they were separated by a considerable distance, they would not hesitate to launch an energy bombardment, as if they only wanted to vent and enjoy themselves. This was clearly the rhythm of a complete rampage. More than 10 immortal old monsters, without exception, almost went crazy with anger. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yi Xian had already quickly retreated far away, not wanting to get close to this group of crazy chasing and escaping immortal realm old monsters. While they were busy in the west, Yi Xian went to the east, specifically choosing a quiet place to settle down and fish in troubled waters. As long as no one was paying attention, he would immediately take action and quickly obtain a treasure body. Wreckage. Furthermore, every single one of them was of the desolation level, not even quasi-desolation level. He had already collected enough of them. Time passed by slowly. Soon, more than an hour had passed. During this period of time, the vast void in front of them was bustling with activity. More than a dozen immortal realm old monsters chased after them like crazy. However, the lion-nosed old monster was an immortal realm old monster after all, and the void was vast enough. It was obviously impossible to do anything to him in a short time. As for Yi Xian, he was still waiting for the right opportunity to take action. Unbeknownst to him, half of the remaining 70 or so corpses of the primordial era were taken away by him. There were only a little more than 30 primordial era experts left in the void. Wait, fellow Taoists, please stop. It seems that half of the primordial era treasure body remains have disappeared. It wasn't until now that the rage had gotten to their heads. The undyings that had lost their rationality and were on the brink of insanity finally regained their senses. No one knew who shouted first, but the other undyings that seemed to have woken up from a dream all turned to look around, after which their bodies shook violently as they roared again. Damn it, in such a short time, half of the primordial era treasure body remains have disappeared. There were more than 70 corpses just now. This is definitely not the work of the lion old monster. Faced with the crazy pursuit of more than a dozen immortals of the same level, he had no chance to take action at all. We've all been deceived. The lion old monster is obviously the scapegoat. At the same time, he attracted our attention, and the hidden mastermind took the opportunity to take action, roar. Who is it? Who is it? I'm going to tear him apart. Come out now. We were too careless. More than a dozen immortals were fooled by someone right under our noses. How can we endure this? Old Lion is really a piece of sh*t. He's really a piece of sh*t. Only you know the truth. Why didn't you tell us the truth when you knew we were fooled? It's all because of you. As these roars rang out, the group of immortal realm old monsters immediately stopped their pursuit and spread out their divine sense at the first possible moment, constantly sweeping the surrounding void to investigate, meticulously not letting go of any trace of what was going on. From the beginning to the end, I'm the most wronged victim, okay? Far away in the void ahead, the lion-nosed old monster, who had been so tired that he was panting, could finally stop and take a breath. He muttered to himself with an inexplicable look of grief and indignation on his face. A group of shameless old men, how dare they blame me? How immoral, walala. Hua, just as the 10 or so immortal old monsters from the various clans of the second universe were suddenly enlightened, they spread out their divine sense and searched the entire void crazily. At this time, the clear sound of chains rattling suddenly sounded without warning at this time. Along with the familiar sound of chains rattling, from the direction of the entrance passage of the mysterious ancient world fragment, a huge bronze cauldron, which was not weaker than any of the superstars, was rapidly approaching. The netherworld cauldron, which came from the first universe, finally rushed into the collapsed ancient world, bringing with it endless ferocious flames. It completely descended. Chapter 4164. Walala, boom. Rumble, the netherworld furnace descended, and as soon as it arrived, it was like the end of the world. The 20,000 rune chains outside the walls of the cauldron waved endlessly, and some entangled the remains of the primordial creatures in the void, directly taking them away and throwing them into the internal space of the netherworld furnace. And some rune chains launched an attack, like a giant python in the starry sky, lashing out at the battleships of the vanguard explorers of the various races in the second universe, causing these battleships to explode in an instant, turning into fireballs, illuminating the void. All of this happened too quickly, and the change was shocking. In the blink of an eye, the netherworld furnace had cleared a large area of the void, destroying at least thousands of battleships of the various races in the second universe. As for the remains of the primordial creatures that were taken into the netherworld furnace, there were even more, tens of thousands of them. Obviously, destroying these battleships was just a matter of convenience. The netherworld furnace's main purpose was to collect the remains of the primordial creatures in the void. The moment Yi Xian looked back, he happened to see the remains of 2 primordial creatures being collected by the netherworld furnace without any suspense, disappearing in the blink of an eye. His pupils shrank in an instant. Although he had collected more than 10,000 corpses of the desolation creatures, and more than 300 of them were at the desolation level. Although there were still many corpses left in this void, there were only a few at the desolation level. There were only 30 of them. In fact, Yi Xian's side had already decided to give up on the last 30 or so corpses of the primordial era's supreme beings. Even so, when he saw the netherworld furnace plundering the corpses of various levels so quickly and recklessly, he still felt incomparably indignant and suffocated. The key was that not only was the other party's efficiency extremely high, but its posture was also a little too domineering. Compared to Yi Xian, who took more than 2 days to collect more than 10,000 primordial creatures' remains. Forget it, compared to the netherworld furnace, only people would be angered to death. Damn it, you dare to be more monstrous than this Star Master, one day I will take you. Yi Xian glared fiercely at the netherworld cauldron. Without further delay, his figure flashed and he directly rushed toward the silver dragon on the right side of the void. At the same time, the lion-nosed old monster and more than 10 other undying old monsters of the second universe, who had been searching frantically in the void, were all roaring in fear. Damn it, are you all stupid? Avoid it, quickly avoid it. Rice bucket. A bunch of rice buckets. He clearly saw the furnace rushing over, but he actually stayed in the same place and waited for death. What a pity for the remains of those treasured bodies. I've worked hard for nearly 3 days and finally collected some corpses below the immortal rank. Now, I've lost at least 1/10 of them. Evacuate immediately. Take the remains of the treasured body that have been stored in the battleship and rush out. Return to the clan and we will discuss further. At this moment, these 10 undying old monsters' hearts were bleeding. In the past 3 days, even though they had been thinking of a way to collect the remains of the immortal rank and above treasured bodies, the clan fleets they had brought had been collecting the remains of the Star Lord, Domain Lord and Sector Lord level treasured bodies without stopping for a single moment. There were even some normal immortal rank remains that they would occasionally take action to collect. After successfully collecting them, they would either keep them in their bodies or send them to their battleships for storage. However now, in the blink of an eye, the Netherworld Cauldron had destroyed close to 10,000 battleships. Every race was affected. Every battleship's destruction represented a huge loss that far exceeded the battleship itself. It would be strange if they didn't feel heartache. Very quickly, following the orders of the 10 Undyings, all the space battleships in the surrounding space all changed directions. As they circled around to avoid the Netherworld Cauldron, they all headed back to where they had come from 3 days ago. At this moment, Yi Xian, who was still using his mental force secret technique to perfectly conceal his aura, finally arrived in front of the silver dragon that was over 100,000 meters long. Looking around, seeing that the 10 undying old monsters weren't paying attention to him, he swiftly made his move. In the blink of an eye, he successfully stored the enormous silver dragon into the Shen Nong cauldron within him. After which, Yi Xian didn't hesitate at all. With a flash of his body, he charged towards the final target, which was the enormous golden dragon that was over 200,000 m long. One had to say, the timely arrival of the Netherworld Cauldron, from a certain point of view, was a huge help to Yi Xian. Whether it was the silver dragon that had already been captured or the golden dragon that Yi Xian was about to attack, they were both enormous in size. If the Netherworld Cauldron didn't suddenly arrive and disrupt the situation, attracting the attention of the 10 Undyings, Yi Xian would definitely be discovered the moment he made his move. Although he wasn't afraid even if he was discovered, he had been so careful and forcefully held on for nearly 3 days. At the very last moment, he was still exposed, which was quite depressing. At this moment, after successfully storing the silver dragon, Yi Xian immediately rushed to the golden dragon on the other side of the void. Taking advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention, he suddenly waved his hand. In the blink of an eye, he stored the remains of the 200,000 m long golden dragon into the Shen Nong cauldron. This time, his actions were finally discovered. Damn it, that guy hiding in the dark is actually still here, millions of miles away. An undying old monster from an unknown race in the second universe happened to turn his head and saw the scene of the golden dragon that was lying across the void in front of him mysteriously disappearing. After being slightly stunned, this old guy was so angry that he almost vomited blood. It could be said that he flew into a rage. As he roared, he turned around and shot towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian glanced at him coldly. He wasn't interested in paying attention to him at all. The last target, the golden dragon, had already been successfully stored into the internal space of the Shen Nong cauldron. He only stayed behind to watch the show. Taking advantage of the fact that the other party hadn't arrived yet, he immediately turned around and fled. With a flash of his body, he rushed into the depths of this mysterious ancient world. His figure quickly disappeared. Roar! Roar! Damn it! Damn it, he escaped again. Roar! The furious undying old monster investigated and searched, but in the end, he couldn't find any trace of the other party. After realizing that the other party had successfully escaped far away, he immediately roared again, his voice shaking the void. Walala. Hua. Chapter 4165. The Netherworld stove was so famous that even the undying old monsters didn't dare to face it head-on. Following its unexpected arrival, the vanguard exploration fleet of the various races of the second universe was the first to enter this mysterious desolate world. After the initial chaos, they quickly restored order and avoided the area where the dark stove was wantonly wreaking havoc. They took a detour and rushed to the entrance of this desolate world, Even the lion-nosed old monster and the other undying old monsters couldn't do anything in the face of the netherworld stove's monstrous flames. They sighed from time to time and followed. This time, they entered this mysterious desolate world as the vanguard fleet of the various races of the second universe to explore. Until now, the final result could be said to be nothing. Instead, they returned with a stomach full of resentment. In addition to the raging aura of the netherworld stove after its sudden arrival, what made them feel even more resentful was the hidden culprit behind the scenes. He didn't know when that guy had followed them in. He couldn't even be sure if he had come in from the outside world, or if he was a native of this mysterious world, or if he had come here through some other means. But one thing was for sure, and that was, he hid in the dark and used some unknown method to completely hide his aura. Then, he quietly took away the remains of the treasured bodies of the desolate creatures. There were even more than 300 primordial expert-level corpses, including the 2 silver dragon and golden dragon that were over 100,000 feet and 200,000 feet respectively. Then, how could he not have collected the corpses of the primordial experts and below? What was more infuriating was that after this guy was exposed, he actually framed the lion-nosed old monster and almost caused them to turn against each other on the spot. Every time they thought of this, the undying old monsters from the various races of the second universe felt suffocated. They couldn't breathe and couldn't wait to immediately turn around and continue the search. No matter what, they had to find this abominable guy and torture him to death. But this was obviously extremely irrational. Facing the chaotic and worrisome situation in front of them, they had to immediately return to their races and report everything. They also had to try their best to find 1 or 2 treasures that could take the remains of the desolate creatures' level treasured bodies that will like the netherworld stove. Then, they could turn around and kill. Otherwise, it was useless to stay here. Not to mention that all the remains of the treasured bodies in the outer area would soon be taken away by the netherworld stove. Even without this, the remains of the treasured bodies were still lying in the void, and they still couldn't take them away. They could only watch and feel anxious. With this thought in mind, the group of immortal realm old monsters arrived at the entrance and waved their hands, giving the order to all the fleets under their command to retreat. Then, without any hesitation, they rushed toward the entrance in front of them one after another. However, a scene that no one had expected occurred. Whether it was the undyings of the various races in the second universe or the various fleets behind them, they were all teleported to the void region behind them without exception after entering the entrance in front of them. It was as if he had run into a reverse spatial tunnel. He was charging forward, but in the end, his vision blurred, and he reappeared not in the domain of Shadow Devil of the second universe, but in the mysterious primordial heaven and earth behind him. Some of the battleships were even unlucky enough to be transmitted to the area where the netherworld stove was wreaking havoc. The result was as expected. Before everyone in the battleships could react, the battleships they were in were instantly destroyed by the netherworld stove. This scene was really too strange, but it was not completely incomprehensible. Obviously, this mysterious entrance to the desolate era, which was 20 to 30 million kilometers wide in the domain of Shadow Devil of the second universe, was a one-way starry passage that could only be entered, but not exited. The reason for this must have something to do with this mysterious desolate era. But all this was not important anymore. What was important was that they couldn't get out at all. They couldn't escape even if they wanted to. Damn it, what kind of lousy place is this? Isn't it too overbearing to allow people to enter but not leave? It seems that we can't leave for the time being. We'll think of another way later. After all, the main forces of our races will be here soon. By then, the fleets of the various races will be larger and more prepared. I hope they will bring 1 or 2 heavy artifacts that can collect the remains of the treasured bodies of the powerful figures of the desolate world. Come here, treasure. We can't leave anyway. Why don't we go back? There's no need to waste time on the netherworld stove. It will only increase the casualties. I think the evil mastermind must have thought the same. He should have left and gone deeper. Let's go after him right away, all battleships. Turn around immediately. Let's go. Long, following the orders of the undying old monsters, the fleets of various races that had just gathered started to turn around. Then, they started to move at full speed and gathered into an enormous fleet of more than 3 million starships of various types. After bypassing the area where the netherworld stove was raging in front of them, from the edge of one side, they sailed into the depths of the void of this mysterious desolate world. They gradually moved further and further away and disappeared. Half a day later, the remains of the treasured bodies of the desolate creatures in the outer area of the void had basically been collected. The netherworld stove also turned into a ray of light and shot further ahead. What was left in the void was only the wreckage of a large number of starships that had been destroyed by the netherworld furnace. They were still burning quietly. The vast void of the universe around them was so silent that it was terrifying. Not long after, the second batch of main forces from the various races of the second universe arrived one after another. After seeing the tragic scene in the outer area and the empty void in front of them, the main forces from the various races of the second universe did not stay for long. They had all arrived at the same time. They all rushed to the depths of the front. Following that, this area was unusually quiet for a few days. However, this rare silence was quickly broken again. The large fleets from the races of the first universe and the human race of the third universe, as well as the Senate of the Wan Luo Federation, arrived one after another. They rushed into this mysterious desolate world from the entrance of the passage outside. These top races and forces from the other two main planes of the starry sky did not hesitate at all. After a brief investigation, they also rushed to the deeper area ahead. Chapter 4166. In a flash, 10 days had passed in the blink of an eye. 10 days ago, Yi Xian was at the periphery of this mysterious desolate world. After absorbing the last target, which was the remains of the golden dragon, which was more than 200,000 feet in size, into his body, he immediately left, heading deeper into the void of this mysterious desolate world without any hesitation. Shooting away, in his opinion, since the void of this mysterious desolate world was filled with so many remains of the desolate world's treasured bodies, then, in the deeper hinterland and other areas further ahead, the treasured body resources that could be seen everywhere in the void must be even more amazing. There was even a high chance that there would be other opportunities and fortunes. In short, even he, like all the other experts who had entered the desolate world, was certain that this exploration of the otherworldly space would definitely be an amazing journey of harvest. However, reality and ideals often ran counter to one's wishes. Reality and ideals often ran counter to one's wishes. For an entire 10 days, Yi Xian had maintained a speed that was close to the limit. He had determined a direction and flew through the air at an extremely fast speed. In the end, he even took out the void hole shuttle, and his speed instantly increased by several times, but up until now, he still hadn't gained anything. After leaving the periphery of the desolate world, in the void of the universe, not only did he not see any remains of the desolate world's treasured bodies, even a slightly complete star was rarely seen. As for the life planets, that was even more impossible. Along the way, although there were indeed stars of various sizes scattered in the void of the universe like a normal universe plane, these stars were all damaged without exception. Some had even completely collapsed into a pile of different sizes. The star fragments were gone, just like that, floating in the void, exuding a strong aura of destruction. These stars were most likely destroyed in the desolate world's unparalleled battle that had destroyed the entire desolate world. It was also possible that after that, when this corner of the desolate world was drifting in the endless void, it was due to some unforeseen events such as void turbulence, star field collision, and so on. Destroy, however, to Yi Xian, none of this was important. His greatest wish right now was to be able to see the endless remains of the primordial life form treasure in a certain part of the universe in front of him, or a ball of life. Even if the creatures living on this planet were all savage beasts who had yet to develop intelligence, it would be fine. At the very least, he wouldn't be as lost and disappointed as he was now. If he were to know that before he entered this mysterious desolate world, apart from the vanguard exploration fleet of the various races of the second universe who were lingering at the edge of the previous periphery and trying to collect the remains of the treasure body, there were no other survivors. Even earlier, the first to enter this place was actually a small fleet of more than 100 battleships from the Een Devil clan, as well as the former clan leader of the Een Devil clan, the old monster who was now a sector lord, Een Emperor. The unease and apprehension in Yi Xian's heart was probably even more intense. Yin Emperor and the small fleet commanded by Yin 7 clearly didn't linger around the periphery of the vast amount of remains of the primordial lifeforms. They had undoubtedly taken the lead and entered the depths of the primordial world even earlier than the rest. With Yi Xian's speed, he should have caught up to them long ago. But in reality, he had traveled for an entire 10 days, and apart from the occasional broken star in the void, he hadn't encountered anything else. This matter was very strange, but it could also be because this mysterious desolate world was too vast. Yin Emperor and the small fleet of the Yin Devil clan were moving in a different direction from Yi Xian, and they had unknowingly missed each other. But no matter what, if Yi Xian knew about this matter, he would more or less be a little vigilant. But now, his entire mind was troubled by the seemingly endless monotonous scene in front of him. His mind was in turmoil, and he didn't have the mind to think about anything else. This kind of extremely boring journey in the void continued. In the blink of an eye, another month passed. When Yi Xian's patience was about to be completely exhausted, the angry roar of a vicious beast finally came from the void of the universe in front of him. This vicious beast's angry roar entered Yi Xian's ears, and to him, it was no different from the sound of nature. No, it was even more pleasing to the ear than the sound of nature. It almost instantly revived him on the spot, and his dispirited spirit was instantly refreshed. Without any hesitation, he immediately activated the void-shattering shuttle and followed the direction of the vicious beast's roar. The void-shattering shuttle shot in the direction of the vicious beast's angry roar at an extremely fast speed. As he got closer and closer, the movement in the void in front of him became clearer and clearer. In addition to the occasional vicious beast's roar, there were clearly some booming sounds. Listening to the sound, it should be caused by the attack of a magical weapon or the bombardment of a ship's cannon. Obviously, there was a fierce battle going on in the distant void in front of him. The two sides of the fierce battle, one side was an unknown number of vicious beasts in the starry sky, and the other side. Since they could use magical weapons to attack or drive warships to bombard, even if they weren't humans, at least they were at least a high-level life form with extremely high intelligence. Furthermore, considering that this world originated from the distant and mysterious primordial age, it was basically impossible for there to be scientific and technological forces that only existed in the present age. Therefore, more than 80% of the violent explosions that came from the front should be caused by the release of a magical weapon. In other words, more than a month after entering this mysterious desolate world, in a distant void in front of him, there finally appeared indigenous creatures who were suspected to be survivors of the desolate era. Moreover, their cultivation and strength seemed to be quite good, and their numbers were definitely not small. Thinking of this, Yi Xian suddenly became more excited. After more than a month of hard work, he finally found someone he could inquire about. Regardless of whether the other party was a survivor of the primordial era or not, his identity as a native was definitely undeniable. Since he was a native, he must have some understanding of this world. This was of great significance to Yi Xian. At the very least, this kind of aimless, lost, and boring journey through the stars should be coming to an end. With this kind of excitement, Yi Xian steered the void-shattering shuttle at top speed for half a day. In the distance of the void, where the explosions and the roars of the vicious beasts came from, a rather dim light finally appeared. This gloomy light was like a membrane. Looking through it, one's field of vision was blurry, as if they were gazing into another world. Chapter 4167. Whoosh! With a faint sound of breaking through the air, the void-shattering shuttle, which had reached its maximum speed, rushed out of the huge gray light screen in front of it. In the blink of an eye, it had arrived at another part of the universe outside the light screen. This place was indeed like another world. Even the light was much brighter in an instant. Previously, Yi Xian had traveled all the way here. In the mysterious and ancient world behind the gray light screen, all the stars were dilapidated. There was not a single star that was still emitting light. Naturally, the light was dim. And the new world in front of him was basically not much different from the three main starry skies that Yi Xian had come into contact with before. There were all kinds of stars and stars, it was just that the aura of this world was clearly very old, revealing a strong sense of desolation. It wasn't until the void-shattering shuttle rushed out of that gigantic gray light screen, and entered this new world that was filled with a dense and ancient aura, that he suddenly realized that before entering, he had actually forgotten to activate the concealment formation of the void-shattering shuttle. The concealment array of the void-shattering shuttle had always been active. However, as Yi Xian traveled alone in the dark and desolate world behind the screen of light, he didn't encounter a single life planet for a long time. As he gradually became impatient, he closed the concealment array of the void-shattering shuttle. Because of this, the void-shattering shuttle, which was originally in a concealed state, revealed itself. In the subsequent space travel, if a life form appeared in a certain part of the universe, even if he did not detect the existence of the other party, it was very likely that the other party would take the initiative to approach the void-shattering shuttle after discovering it. But now, the serious consequences of this small oversight were obviously something that Yi Xian did not expect before this. In the void about 1,000,000 miles in front of him, there was a great battle in space. The commotion that Yi Xian heard from behind the gray light screen happened here and was transmitted through the huge gray light screen. The fact that the commotion of the great battle could be transmitted to such a distant part of the universe showed that the scale and intensity of this space battle was very shocking. However, it took some time for Yi Xian to rush over. Furthermore, no one knew exactly when this interstellar battle had started. Therefore, at this moment, this astonishing interstellar battle was about to end. It had entered its final stages. As for the two sides of the battle, it was just as Yi Xian had guessed. One side was the ferocious beasts of the stars, and the other side was the humans. To be more precise, it should be the survivors of the primordial era. In this battle, the side of the astral beasts had clearly lost. At this time, in the void nearly 100 miles away, the remains of astral beasts of all sizes could be seen everywhere. All of them were damaged, and a thick smell of blood floated in the starry sky. Yi Xian was nearly 100 miles away, and he was still in the void-shattering shuttle. Everyone inside could clearly smell it. With a casual glance, he roughly determined that there were at least tens of thousands of ferocious starry sky corpses in the void. After all, the ferocious starry sky corpses that had been killed first had most likely been taken into storage treasures by the victorious party. This was obviously a large-scale interstellar hunting operation. Tens of thousands of astral beasts were hunted on a large scale, and the survivors of the primordial era on the victorious side were the hunters of the hunt. To be able to carry out such a large-scale interstellar hunting operation, and to end it successfully in the end, it was obvious that the number of survivors of the primordial era on the hunters' side was definitely not too small. According to Yi Xian's estimation, at least a dozen large tribes of survivors of the primordial era participated in this large-scale interstellar hunting operation. Because in the hunting void nearly 1,000,000 miles away, a large number of survivors of the primordial era gathered around the central region where countless remains of astral beasts were lying across. It could be seen that they had roughly formed a dozen distinct groups. He didn't know much about these survivors of the primordial era and their various situations, so he referred to them as tribes for the time being. These dozen tribes, each tribe had more than 100,000 survivors of the primordial era. In other words, the total number of survivors of the primordial era who participated in this large-scale interstellar hunting operation in the entire void was more than 1,000,000. Moreover, these more than 1,000,000 survivors of the primordial era who belonged to more than a dozen large tribes were clearly all experts of the starry sky. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to stay in the void of the universe with their physical bodies. More than 1,000,000 experts of the starry sky hunting less than 100,000 astral beasts in the void. As long as the disparity in strength between the two sides wasn't too great, then the final result of the battle would belong to the side with more people, obviously without any suspense. On the side of the tens of thousands of astral beasts that were almost completely wiped out, the strongest experts that Yi Xian sensed were only at the sector lord level, and there were only 6 of them. 4 of them had already fallen, and only 2 of them were still leading 2 small groups of astral beasts, struggling bitterly. As for the more than 1,000,000 survivors of the primordial era who gathered around the tens of thousands of astral beasts and the remains of the astral beasts, in terms of strength, there wasn't even a single universe-level existence, not to mention the undying old monsters. It was completely impossible, otherwise this battle would have ended from the beginning. How could it have lasted for so long? Among the more than 1 million survivors of the primordial era, the strongest one was also at the sector lord level, but there were 2 more of them than the astral beasts, a total of 8 sector lord level existences. The rest of the survivors of the primordial era had different strengths, but they were basically at the 8th realm of the starry sky, which was the black hole realm and above. Otherwise, they were basically not qualified to participate in such a large-scale interstellar battle. Because the scale of this interstellar space hunt was too large, and the battle wasn't completely over yet, and because the other tribes of the primordial era who were gathered in other directions were further away from the huge light screen that Yi Xian had rushed out from. Of course, the most important thing was that Yi Xian's space-shattering shuttle wasn't very big, only about 300 meters long, which was the captain of the shuttle. And when he rushed out of the huge light screen, it only caused a faint sound of breaking through the air, but didn't cause too much of a commotion. All these factors added together led to the fact that the number of survivors of the primordial era who had rushed out of the huge light screen at the first moment was actually not many. It was just a small group of people from a large tribe closest to the huge light screen, about 1,000 people, definitely not more than 2,000. Chapter 4168. Seeing the void-shattering shuttle suddenly rushing out of a huge dark light screen, these over 1,000 people who were originally heading in this direction to collect the remains of a relatively large ferocious star beast, after being stunned for a moment, they quickly cried out involuntarily one after another, "Look, from the abyss of sin ahead, a monster rushed out." What monster? It's obviously a big insect. It can grow to such a size, so it shouldn't be too weak. Everyone, be careful. Strange, why can't I sense any aura of cultivation in this big insect? There's not even a bit of ferocious aura. It seems to be different from ordinary insects. That's why it's a monster. Although I can't sense any aura of cultivation, judging from the luster of its shell, it must be extremely hard. This insect is not easy to deal with. Get into formation immediately. Get into formation, surround and kill this strange insect from the abyss of sin. These words, word by word, were all clearly heard by Yi Xian. In an instant, his face turned green, and there was a hint of resentment in his eyes. Uncultured, how terrible. This group of survivors of the primordial era had obviously never seen a starry sky battleship. This was normal. There was no technological power in the primordial era at all. And this mysterious primordial era, although it had always existed, was only a fragment of the primordial era. After it was shattered in the unparalleled battle of the primordial era, it had been in exile. Being exiled in the boundless void was no different from being completely sealed off. Therefore, the survivors of the primordial era who lived in this broken world naturally could not come into contact with the outside world, so it was impossible for them to develop technological power. Under such circumstances, it was inevitable that they suddenly saw the void-breaking shuttle and subconsciously judged it to be a monster insect from its appearance. With the exclamations, these survivors of the primordial era quickly dispersed, vaguely forming a battle formation, and quickly surrounded the void-breaking shuttle. In fact, when they exclaimed, many of the survivors of the primordial era in the void not far behind them were alarmed and turned their heads to look. However, when they saw that the existence that had rushed out of the so-called abyss of sin was merely a strange insect that was less than 300 meters long, and there was already a group of more than 1,000 people from their own camp that had gone forward to form a battle formation, and were about to begin the hunt. Therefore, the other survivors of the primordial era who were alarmed obviously did not take this matter to heart. Soon, they turned their heads and put their attention back to the end of the starry sky hunt in front of them. It was obvious that the 1,000-plus survivors of the primordial era that were charging towards the void-shattering shuttle in a battle formation weren't a threat to Yi Xian at all. Their cultivation strength was basically around the void realm and Genesis realm, and there was not even a single one of them. The last 3 or 4 people were only in the 14th realm, which was the early or middle stage of the cosmic light realm. If Yi Xian wanted to, with just a raise of his hand, he would be able to easily suppress the 1,000 or so survivors of the primordial era that were charging forward and trying to surround and kill him. But he obviously would not do so. The reason why the other party rushed over so aggressively was just because of a misunderstanding. Yi Xian was a newcomer. On the one hand, he did not intend to make too many enemies, and on the other hand, he wanted to inquire about some information through these survivors of the primordial era. Besides, he had been flying alone in the dark void behind the huge light curtain for so long. He hadn't seen a living person for nearly 2 months. Now that he finally saw one, let alone a human, even if it was just an ugly space beast, he would still be able to see it. Now that he had finally seen one, not to mention that the other party was a human, even if it was just an ugly space beast, Yi Xian would feel that the other party was very friendly. With that thought, his figure flickered and directly swept out of the space-breaking shuttle, appearing in the void outside in the blink of an eye. Then, with a wave of his hand, he immediately kept the space-breaking shuttle and the undying world in his body. He did not want to leave it outside and be mistaken as a strange big bug and attacked by these people. This is SSS. Mahayana Realm. Oh no, something's wrong. That strange bug actually has a master, and it is actually the mount of a Mahayana Realm old monster. This is bad. Seeing Yi Xian suddenly appear and put away the void-shattering shuttle with a wave of his hand, the 1,000 or so survivors of the primordial era that had already formed a battle formation were first stunned, then their bodies abruptly stopped at the same time. Their expressions changed as they cried out in alarm. It was obvious that they were frightened by the universe-grade aura emanating from Yi Xian's body. Furthermore, they were quite frightened. At this moment, there were soft exclamations, and many of them were even trembling. The so-called Mahayana realm obviously referred to the universe grade. However, the latter was the name of the 3 main planes of the starry sky, while this was a fragment of the primordial era that was completely sealed off. Naturally, the name of the cultivator's realm could not be the same as that of the 3 main planes of the starry sky. This was just a difference in the name, so Yi Xian did not bother to pay attention to it at all. When he saw that these people had all stopped in the void hundreds of thousands of miles away and were staring at him in horror, he could not help but smile bitterly and shake his head. Then, he directly cupped his fists and bowed slightly. He said loudly, "Fellow cultivators, this is my first time here and I don't know the way. May I know the name of this star domain?" The reason Yi Xian claimed that his surname was Qiao and that he had even thought of a single name, Feng, was because he had thought about it. Although he was the first powerhouse of the current era to rush through the huge light screen and enter this strange corner of the primordial era, it would not be long before the fleets of the various races of the second universe would arrive here one after another. After the news spread, the fleets of the human race, the myriad Luo Federation, and the other large forces and starry sky powerhouses from the first universe and the third universe would all be the same. Yi Xian did not want to expose his whereabouts, so he naturally could not use his real identity to announce his name. Qiao Feng was just an alias that he casually came up with. At this moment, Yi Xian would never have imagined that in the near future, the alias Qiao Feng that he casually came up with would explode like thunder in this corner of the primordial era and resound through the endless void. It had even surpassed that of the 7 unparalleled evildoers of the current era's 3 great geniuses. The sensation that the starry sky main plane had caused. Chapter 4169. Kill you? Why should I kill you? Hearing the other party's words, Yi Xian was immediately angered to the point of laughter. He suddenly realized that there was a faint sense of servility in the bones of these ancient survivors, or rather, it was a kind of bone-deep depression. However, when he thought about it, the universe they lived in was merely a fragment of the primordial world. The source of their bloodline was gone, so it was inevitable that they would become like this due to hesitation and confusion. When he thought of this, Yi Xian couldn't help but feel a trace of pity for these primordial survivors. In truth, they should be of the same bloodline as the human race of the 3 main planes of stars. However, due to the different environments they lived in, they had completely different reactions to each other. It had to be said that this was truly a matter of emotion. Yi Xian sighed inwardly and immediately said, "I've already said that I've only just arrived here and don't know much about this star field, so I'd like to inquire about some information from you." That's great. Senior, the mulberry star where our 12 tribes live is nearby. It's not very far away. Yes. If you don't mind, I hope you can visit our mulberry star. I'll naturally report everything about this star field to you later. Seeing that Yi Xian didn't seem to be lying, the most important thing was that he didn't feel the slightest bit of anger. Moreover, as a supreme expert of the Mahayana realm, his attitude was actually so easygoing. It was truly pleasantly surprised and flattering. As a result, while they were excited, the strongest few cosmic light realm experts among the 1,000+ survivors of the primordial era quickly took a step forward, cupped their hands, and invited Yi Xian with hope. Yi Xian nodded and immediately agreed. That's fine. I've only just arrived here, so I don't have a place to stay. What's wrong with staying on Mulberry Star for a while? Senior, please. Our tribe's mission has already been completed. We'll leave some of our tribesmen behind to collect the remains of this ferocious beast before we can return to the tribe. As he spoke, the strongest among them, a middle-aged man who had reached the 7th level of the cosmic light realm, seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He quickly changed the topic and said, "Oh right, Senior, the 1,000 over of us belong to the Ping Shan village under the jurisdiction of the Hong Tian tribe. I'm the leader of the village. It's Yang Shan." Previously, Yi Xian had heard him mention that there were a total of 12 large tribes on Mulberry Ji Star. Presumably, this Hong Tian tribe was one of them. Under the Hong Tian tribe, there were probably quite a number of mountain strongholds. The 1,000 over people in front of him belonged to a small mountain stronghold called the Flat Mountain Stronghold. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Yi Xian did not say much and immediately nodded. "If that's the case, Senior, please board the one carriage. This junior will immediately welcome Senior into the mountain-raising stronghold. I will definitely treat Senior well." Seeing that Yi Xian was so agreeable, the self-proclaimed leader of Pingyang Mountain was obviously very happy. As he spoke, he waved his hand and took out a one carriage magic treasure, respectfully inviting Yi Xian to board. It could be seen that this guy clearly had some selfish motives. It seemed that he did not want Yi Xian's existence to be known by the other small mountain strongholds or large tribes. Therefore, he wanted to bring him away from this area as soon as possible. The reason for this might be related to Yi Xian's cultivation. But all this was not important. Yi Xian could not be bothered with it. After nodding his head, he leaped and entered the one carriage magic treasure. There were no elements of technological power in this world. The survivors of the primordial era did not even recognize the starry sky battleships. Their means of transportation were basically all one carriages, flying boats, and other types of flying magic treasures. Although it was a bit strange, Yi Xian was relieved when he thought that the human cultivator camp in the third universe was also like this. He did not feel that there was anything wrong with it. Seeing Yi Xian enter the one carriage, Pingyang Mountain was overjoyed. He quickly boarded the one carriage with several other cosmic light realm elders. Then, he said a few words to the mountain strongholds who stayed to collect the remains of the huge beast. Then, he channeled the power in his body and drove the one carriage magic treasure to one side. The universe void blasted away. According to Ping Yangshan's introduction, although the mulberry tree star where they lived wasn't far from here, it wasn't close either. With his cosmic light realm cultivation, he would need around 3 days to reach here if he drove the one chariot with all his strength. And in this vast galaxy void within a radius of 100 million miles, Mulberry Ji Star was the only life planet where the survivors of the primordial era lived. Of course, in this area, there were some other life planets. Although there were no survivors of the primordial era living on them, there were all kinds of ferocious star beasts. And these ferocious star beasts were the food of the survivors of the primordial era on Mulberry Ji Star, as well as the only flesh and blood resource to improve their cultivation strength. As for the large-scale starry sky hunt that Yi Xian had just seen, for the survivors of the primordial era on Mulberry Ji Star, it was not something that happened often. In this starry sky hunt, all 12 major tribes on Mulberry Ji Star participated. Although not all of their clansmen were involved, such a scale basically only happened once or twice a year. Mulberry Ji Star was the only life planet where the survivors of the primordial era lived within a radius of 100 million miles of the universe void. The total number of survivors of the primordial era in this planet was very shocking. Nearly half of the surface area of Mulberry Ji Star was a vast ocean, and the other half of the land area was divided into more than a dozen giant continents by the vast ocean. Among these continents, except for a few that were too barren, and thus had very few survivors of the primordial era. Among these dozen continents, there were 12 that belonged to the 12 major tribes of Mulberry G***. Every major tribe had more than 10 million people. Hong Tian tribe was one of them. Within Hong Tian tribe, there were close to 1,000 strongholds of various sizes. A small stronghold only had a few thousand people, while a large stronghold had tens of thousands of people, or even hundreds of thousands of people. The flat mountain stronghold led by Ping Yangshan was only considered average among the thousands of strongholds in Hong Tian tribe. All the strongholds added up to just a little over 10,000 people. However, among these 10,000 people, there were close to 40% old, young, women, and children. There were only about 6,000 true cultivators. As the stronghold leader of Flat Mountain Stronghold, Ping Yangshan had the cultivation of a level 7 cosmic ray realm martial artist. However, he was not the strongest person in Flat Mountain Stronghold. In Flat Mountain Stronghold, there was also an elder whose cultivation had reached the universe realm. Chapter 4170. This planet was not very big, but it was not small either. It was about the same size as the Sky River star. However, compared to the modern three-dimensional architecture of the Sky River star, the Mulberry star, which had no technological elements, was much more backward in terms of architectural style. After entering the atmosphere, Yi Xian saw that on the huge continents, there were basically villages of various sizes. They were all in the simplest form of settlement. There were no tall buildings at all, not to mention those floating platforms in the air or above the sea. However, the total population of the 12 tribes of the Desolation era on the Mulberry star was less than 200 million. Such a huge planet with life, with only 200 million high-level life forms, it was far from crowded. It could even be said that the population density was very low. Under such circumstances, there was really no need for them to build castles in the air and cities on the water. The Hong Tian tribe was located in the southeast of the Mulberry star. The continent that this tribe occupied was called the Hong Tian continent. The Flat Mountain village was located in the northwest of the Hong Tian continent. It was a relatively remote place. The stronghold was located in a warm valley surrounded by huge mountains on 3 sides. On the other side of the valley was a vast expanse of fertile plains. The geographical location was quite good. In the valley, many 3-story brick houses rose from the ground and were distributed according to the terrain. In addition, on the mountain cliffs that surrounded the valley on 3 sides, there were also cave entrances. Obviously, these 3 giant mountain cliffs were also used by the mountain leveling village, and they were carved into cave dwellings. The number of cave dwellings was very high. There were quite a few of them. Soon, the Luan carriage descended and landed in the valley. After Yi Xian got off the Luan carriage, he immediately looked toward the center of the valley. Just now, when he was in the air, he had seen the situation in the entire valley. Everything else was fine, as it belonged to a group of mountain strongholds. Only in the center of the valley was an item that appeared very strange, attracting Yi Xian's interest. This strange object was a big cauldron. Of course, it could not be compared to the Shenong cauldron and the Netherworld cauldron. It was not at the same level at all. However, this big cauldron was obviously a magic treasure. It was just that its grade was not very high. According to Yi Xian's estimation, it was between the best magic treasure and the legendary magic treasure. However, this big cauldron was obviously very old. Its size was more than 1,000 meters wide. It was much bigger than the houses in the surrounding valley. Therefore, it was very eye-catching, which attracted Yi Xian's attention. Senior, this time, our Flat Mountain village has reaped a great harvest from the Starry Sky hunt. We have obtained more than 500 sets of various ferocious beast remains. For the people in the village, this is definitely a rare harvest. Seeing Yi Xian turn his head to look at the big black cauldron in the center of the valley, Flat Mountain Village's village leader Ping Yangshan immediately walked over and said politely, "If these ferocious beast remains are used as food, it doesn't matter if they are kept for a long time. However, if they are used to refine flesh and blood medicine, it's rare for us to have such a great harvest." Before the hunt began, several of the village's higher-ups had already discussed and agreed that apart from a portion of the ferocious beast remains that are not suitable for refining medicine, we will keep them as food for a period of time. The rest of the ferocious beast remains will immediately be thrown into the cauldron. In the cauldron, I'm going to boil the flesh medicine. This matter will begin immediately. In approximately 3 days, this cauldron of great medicine will be completed. With Senior's cultivation and strength, you naturally won't be able to use it, but it's not impossible to taste it as a delicious soup. Refining the ferocious beast? Yi Xian's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. His interest was piqued immediately. His cultivation base was currently at the Universe 1 grade, which he had achieved after successfully breaking through after consuming a vial of level 19 fluid. After reaching the Great Circle of level 9, Yi Xian could still consume a vial of level 20 fluid, which would allow him to break through to the immortal grade. Of course, he hadn't concocted the level 20 fluid yet, but he had already deduced the formula, so it wouldn't be a problem to successfully concoct it. However, based on Yi Xian's experience and deductions, as well as the results of the devouring system in his body, all indicated that the level 20 fluid was already the limit of the gene cultivation fluid. In other words, the level 20 fluid would be the end of the road for the evolution of the physical body using the gene cultivation fluid. This kind of magical medicinal fluid created by the elements of science and technology could only push the evolution of the human life form to the immortal grade. After the immortal grade, or in other words, the level 21 fluid after the level 20 fluid, it wasn't impossible to successfully concoct the gene cultivation fluid. It just didn't need to be concocted using the simple concoction method of the past. Instead, it had to be concocted using a method similar to the alchemy method of the human race. However, Yi Xian could roughly understand that this method was to use a cauldron to throw in all sorts of top-notch precious materials and medicines, as well as the flesh and blood of powerful dire beasts, and refine them at the same time. In the end, a medicinal paste or medicinal fluid that contained miraculous effects and huge amounts of energy would be produced. However, he didn't know how to do it. He didn't know anything about it. Although he could slowly experiment and feel his way forward, that would be too time-consuming and laborious. He hadn't expected that this problem would actually be solved in this corner of the broken, desolate ancient realm. The 1,000-meter cauldron in front of him had clearly been placed in the middle of the valley for a very long time. Furthermore, the bottom of the cauldron was clearly a meticulously treated volcanic crater. Obviously, the Mountain Razor village had been using this giant cauldron to draw the underground fire from the volcanic crater to concoct the flesh and blood medicine. Moreover, according to Ping Yangshan, the village leader, this method seemed to be very common among the tribes of the remnants. All the remnants of the desolate ancient realm, from the small villages to the big tribes, concocted the flesh and blood medicine in this way and then swallowed it to improve their strength. It was understandable. After all, after the battle of the desolate ancient realm, this corner of the desolate ancient realm was exiled to the endless void of the universe. They didn't have any contact with the outside world, so they didn't have any technological elements. Even the alchemy method that the human race's cultivation camp had gradually formed after countless years. They didn't know anything about it. However, the method of concocting the flesh and blood medicine that they had was the original ancient system from the desolate ancient realm. It had long been lost in the 3 main planes of the universe. Chapter 4171. At this moment, he learned that all the survivors of the Desolation Era on the life planets in the Desolation Era, regardless of whether they were from small villages or large tribes, were using the same method to refine the flesh medicine. They obtained the powerful flesh medicine with extraordinary effects and enormous energy. Thus, they could improve their cultivation after taking the medicine. After this, Yi Xian was immediately invigorated. He had made the right choice this time. He immediately made a decision. When he returned, he would find a way to collect all the different techniques and secret techniques that were in the hands of these small mountain strongholds and the big tribes. Then, he would hand them all over to the devouring system in his body to be summarized and summarized. Finally, he would deduce the best way to refine the flesh medicine. As a result, with Yi Xian's massive amount of top-notch desolate ancient creatures' corpses and even more top-notch treasures, he was very confident that he could refine several types of level 21 or above flesh and blood medicine in a short period of time. At least, he would be able to refine the flesh medicine that corresponded to the last 4 realms of the 5 realms of the immortal realm, the Marquis Immortal Realm, the King Immortal Realm, the Emperor Immortal Realm, and the Emperor Immortal Realm. At this moment, many villagers of the flat mountain village were already busy around the huge cauldron in the middle of the valley. Everyone seemed to be familiar with the process. They each performed their own duties. Some guided the spring water into the cauldron, while others activated the array to guide the earth fire from the crater under the cauldron. They made the earth fire rise and heat up under the cauldron. Some started to throw some pieces of fierce beast flesh into the cauldron one after another. These pieces of fierce beast flesh were all processed. On the open land near the river on the other side of the valley, a large number of villagers were also busy. This time, the flat mountain village had obtained hundreds of huge pieces of fierce beast flesh. Some of them were thrown into the cauldron without any processing. Some of them were taken from the open land by the river and thrown into the cauldron. Then, they were cut into pieces and thrown into the huge cauldron. Everything seemed to be very busy, but it was also very orderly. Yi Xian looked over from time to time. For a moment, there was a kind of dizzying feeling. The cauldron with a radius of 1,000 meters was not small at all. Just the spring water that was drawn into the cauldron could be considered a large pool. The various heavenly materials and earthly treasures that the villagers threw in one after another could probably be piled into a small mountain. These heavenly materials and earthly treasures should have been collected and stored by the villagers of Flat Mountain Village in the nearby mountains. As for the ferocious beasts' flesh and blood, there were hundreds of them. The largest ones were even 1,000 meters in size. They were cut into pieces of meat of different sizes and thrown into the cauldron. Just this part alone took half a day. When night began to fall, everything was finally completed. At this time, the huge circular cauldron with a radius of 1,000 meters was already about to overflow. Then, a huge and definitely extremely heavy cauldron lid was put on the huge black cauldron by the combined efforts of some of the villagers. The other villagers began to set up some tables and the like on the flat land surrounding the huge black cauldron. At a glance, there was no end to the cauldron. It was obvious that a banquet was about to unfold here. Moreover, this banquet was very likely to last for 3 whole days. It would not end until the meat and medicine in the huge black cauldron was completely refined. When night fell, bonfires were already lit everywhere. A large number of villagers shuttled back and forth, placing all kinds of spiritual fruits, spiritual wine, and some roasted and marinated fierce beast meat on each table. The clan elder with the strongest cultivation in the Flat Mountain stronghold, who had already reached the universe realm, did not appear. However, as the head of the stronghold, the second strongest person in the entire Flat Mountain stronghold, Ping Yangshan, and a few other cosmic realm elders, had always been by Yi Xian's side, occasionally raising their cups to invite him. For the entire Flat Mountain village, a banquet of this scale was obviously not held often. According to Yi Xian's estimation, Ping Yangshan had said before that large-scale starry sky hunts like this one only happened about twice a year in the entire mulberry tree star. If there were no accidents, a banquet of this scale would only happen about twice a year in the Flat Mountain village. Today's great harvest was a rare and grand festival in their eyes. And Yi Xian, who had accidentally come here, became the most distinguished guest of this banquet. Soon, the soup in the huge black cauldron finally began to boil as the earth fire slowly increased in temperature. Although there were still 3 full days before this cauldron of flesh medicine was completely refined, the fierce beast meat in the cauldron had clearly been cooked long ago. There were a few small holes on the cauldron beast, from which steam occasionally rose, bringing with it a strong meaty aroma that filled the entire valley. This meaty aroma was very strange. It was clearly mixed with the unique smell of various heavenly materials and earthly treasures that had been thrown into the cauldron. When mixed together, it actually made one's appetite wet. Even Yi Xian, who was used to eating top-grade fierce beast meat roasted by Shenong's unusual flame, couldn't help but praise in his heart. As expected of an ancient technique that had been passed down since the primordial era. Although he still didn't understand some of the techniques, just this unique aroma that wafted out from the boiling soup was enough to make him look forward to the flesh medicine that would come out of the cauldron in 3 days' time. 3 days' time couldn't be considered long, but it couldn't be considered short either. After Yi Xian, Ping Yangshan, and the other cosmic light realm elders in the stronghold had a round of drinks, everyone finally became familiar with each other, and their chatterboxes naturally opened up. Very soon, Yi Xian took this opportunity to ask about some topics related to the primordial era. For example, why the gloomy world that he had previously rushed out of on the void-shattering shuttle was called the Abyss of Sin, and the truth behind the unparalleled battle in the primordial era that had caused the complete collapse of the entire primordial era. What was it, etc.? These topics were what Yi Xian had been guessing about for a long time, but he had never had a real answer. He only had some hypothetical questions. Taking this opportunity to ask this question, Yi Xian was originally just casually asking, and didn't have high expectations of being able to obtain detailed information. However, life was always like this. There were some things that, when you looked forward to it too much, it would often take a long time to come. When you didn't have high expectations at all, it would suddenly come when you were not mentally prepared, and it would shock you to the core. Perhaps, this was the meaning of the saying, a well-intentioned tree will not succeed, but an unintentional willow will succeed. That's right, for Yi Xian, this time, he had indeed encountered a major surprise that he wasn't mentally prepared for. Because the truth about the unparalleled battle in the primordial era that had destroyed the entire primordial era seemed too mysterious to him, but for these survivors of the primordial era, it was a matter that could be described by word of mouth. Yi Xian had just asked about it, and the several cosmic light realm elders, including Ping Yangshan, had all heard about it. Chapter 4172. From the words of Ping Yangshan and the other universal light realm experts, Yi Xian finally understood the real truth of the battle in the untainted land. He had all kinds of conjectures about the battle in the untainted land that destroyed the entire untainted land, but he had never been able to verify them. Now that Yi Xian had personally heard everything that had happened back then from the mouths of the survivors of the primordial era, his mind instantly rumbled as he was completely stunned. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that the truth behind that unprecedented battle would actually be so bizarre. In the untainted land, when the world was just created, there was already a wisp of the untainted land's heavenly Tao, which accompanied the creation of the world and enveloped the entire untainted land. However, the heavens and earth were heartless, and all living things were nothing but straw dogs. The entire primitive world was like a purgatory of blood and fire. There was slaughter and blood everywhere, and a slightly weaker race would not be able to survive for long at all before being exterminated. Even some of the stronger races had to be vigilant at all times. In order to survive, whether they were willing or not, they had to carry out all kinds of bloody killings from time to time. People were born, grew old, got sick and died, and the moon was waxing and waning. Wind, rain, thunder, lightning, earth, fire, and heavenly wind. All living things in the world were alternating between life and death, and the cycle of life and death had its own unchanging rules of operation. The heavenly Tao was invisible, but it controlled all the rules and Taos. In the untainted land, a group of living things who were born at the beginning of the world were blessed by the great luck of the world. Almost from the beginning, they were born with all kinds of heaven-defying talents and mastered all kinds of magical powers that came with their bloodlines. Some of the outstanding ones cultivated the magical powers of their bloodlines to the extreme, and finally touched one of the 10,000 Taos of the operation of the heavenly Tao. In the various fields represented by their bloodlines, they could almost master the rules of the world, and could be said to be walking the Tao on behalf of the heavens. As the number of living things who were enlightened in the various fields of the rules of the world increased, some of the ancestors of the untainted land who were later regarded as evil cultivators, and at the same time, were dissatisfied with the untainted land that was full of bloody killings everywhere. They conceived a crazy idea. They believed that since the heavenly Tao was formed by the 10,000 laws of Tao that all living things followed, then if some living beings who each controlled one of the laws of Tao were gathered together, why couldn't they create another heavenly Tao? Once this crazy idea was made public, the untainted wastelands were shocked. More and more crazy evil cultivators appeared and gathered together. They left their original heaven and earth and struggled to create the second heavenly Tao in the endless void. Just as the evil cultivators were about to fuse and reorganize the laws of heaven and earth that they each controlled, they actually managed to create an artificial heavenly axiom in the form of an infant. The righteous cultivators and the guardians of the righteous cultivators who had traversed space and time to chase after them finally approached with their armies. A battle of the largest scale since the beginning of the world unfolded in an instant. This unprecedented war lasted for 10,000 years. During this time, countless creatures of the Desolation era participated in it. The entire untainted world was affected by the flames of war. There were countless mighty figures and supreme creatures of the Desolation era who participated in it. Even the cruel and ruthless heavenly Tao of the untainted world suddenly descended in the later part of the war. At that time, the artificial heavenly Tao created by the ancestors of the Desolation era who were known as evil cultivators, which was the infant heavenly Tao, was obviously far from mature. Even so, he still fought with the heavenly Tao of the untainted world several times in the war, and both sides won and lost. In the end, after 10,000 years, this unprecedented war finally came to an end. The result of the war was that both sides suffered great losses, and both sides suffered great casualties. At the last moment, the heavenly Tao of the untainted world and the infant heavenly Tao of the untainted world fought with all their strength. A shocking explosion resounded through the sky. The heavenly Tao of the untainted world was severely injured, and the infant heavenly Tao of the untainted world was beheaded by him. The infant heavenly Tao of the untainted world became a headless infant corpse that contained evil thoughts. In the end, it turned into a fine ray of light and shot away. It went and disappeared. The two supreme experts of the untainted world used their full strength at the end of the war, and completely shattered the vast and boundless untainted world into countless fragments of various sizes. Endless turbulence in the void blew in from the cracks in the void of various sizes, destroying countless races. In the end, the shattered untainted world, which was so shattered that even the heavily injured heavenly Tao of the untainted world was unable to reassemble, swept in all directions. From then on, the unprecedented war that had lasted for 10,000 years finally came to an end, and the once incomparably glorious untainted world was completely destroyed. To the tens of millions of survivors of the primordial era on our mulberry tree star, the once incomparably glorious untainted world is actually not much different from a distant legend. When the final result of the war was mentioned, the few cosmic light realm elders of the mountain-raising stronghold who were sitting around Yi Xian had long since sighed with emotion. Patriarch Ping Yangshan sighed and then continued, "In fact, even we don't know where the end of this corner of the untainted world fragment is. It can be seen how vast and boundless the once incomparably glorious untainted world was. Every time I think of the era and world where my ancestors lived, it is truly fascinating, yet also incomparably sad. This corner of the untainted world fragment is actually so vast." Hearing that even Ping Yangshan and the others did not know where the end of this corner of the untainted world fragment was, Yi Xian could not help but frown slightly. He subconsciously asked, "Could it be that the strongest experts of your mulberry tree star have never gone out and explored the end of this world?" Previously, he had heard Ping Yangshan mention that the leaders of the 12 great tribes of this mulberry tree star were all equivalent to the peak of the 9th stage of the realm lord of the current starry sky. Logically speaking, this kind of cultivation was not weak, so it should not be too dangerous to travel through space and explore the end of this world. A dangerous matter. This world is indeed very vast, but in reality, it is not to the extent that after such a long time, no one has yet to discover the end of it. Leader Ping Yangshan took over the conversation and patiently explained to Yi Xian, "Perhaps, on other planets with stronger existences, someone has already discovered this matter, but on our mulberry tree star, it is completely impossible. In this world, other than the survivors of the primordial era, there are actually more descendants of the primordial era's ferocious beasts. For example, in the vast territory around our mulberry tree star, there are actually many life planets, but there is only one life sphere, the mulberry tree star, and the people living inside are the survivors of the primordial era." Chapter 4173. Ping Yangshan only gave a few simple explanations, but Yi Xian was already completely enlightened. Obviously, the survivors of the primeval age who lived on the vital planets in this corner of the primeval age didn't have an easy time. They were different from the descendants of the primordial beasts who lived on more planets. The descendants of the primordial beasts had their inheritances in their own bloodlines. These primordial beasts devoured each other to make their own bloodlines purer. They evolved step by step and became stronger. However, not many of the inheritances of the survivors of the primordial era were left after the Great Battle in the primordial era. Even if there were, most of them were incomplete. As such, their path of evolution and strength was destined to be much more difficult than the bloodline descendants of the primordial ferocious beasts who lived in the void of the primordial world fragment. Whether it was the height that they could reach or the speed of evolution, they were far inferior to the descendants of the primordial beasts. In this way, when an extremely powerful ferocious beast, such as the immortal rank, existed in a certain star field, then that star field would become a true forbidden area for all the primordial survivors around it. They would not dare to approach it at all. However, if there was such an extremely powerful ferocious beast in every corner of a planet where the survivors of the primordial era lived, then the planet where a small number of survivors of the primordial era lived would be trapped. This was because no matter which direction they explored in, they would eventually encounter a forbidden area guarded by an immortal-level ferocious beast. Therefore, they could only hide in this corner of the central region and struggle at death's door. They could not get in touch with the outside world or contact other survivors of the primordial era. They could not communicate with each other and try to complete the inheritances left by the bloodline ancestor. In this way, it was equivalent to forming a vicious cycle. The strength of the entire race was always in the slow lane of evolution. There was almost no hope for the future. Sangji star was obviously like this. Moreover, in this primeval world fragment void that was still unknown to the extent of its vastness, it was very likely that similar life planets with more or less primeval survivors were all in the same situation. They lived in the crevices of the starry skies. It was no wonder that Yi Xian had felt that these survivors of the primordial era were rather servile. Now, it seemed that it was not servility, but a kind of despair that had almost been engraved in their bones, and the inevitable result of being at a loss for the future. The entire mulberry tree star was a lost planet of life. Maybe in this vast space, there would be some highly evolved primordial planets with undying and even officials. However, it was obvious that the 12 tribes of Sangji star that had never ventured beyond a trillion li of space didn't have such information. Everyone knew. After realizing this, Yi Xian could not help but feel disappointed. He had thought that he would finally be able to figure out the general situation of this fragment of the untainted land since he had finally found a life planet where the survivors of the primordial age lived. He did not expect that the result would be so embarrassing. None of the tens of millions of survivors of the primordial era who lived on this life planet had ventured beyond a trillion li of space. In this space of a trillion li of space, Sangji star was the only life planet where the survivors of the primordial era lived. Even if he wanted to find another place to inquire, he was destined to have no chance. It seemed that he had to rely on himself in the end. A distance of hundreds of millions of kilometers wasn't considered too far for the current Yi Xian. Right now, he could only hope that after leaving this area, he would be able to encounter a life planet with a powerful ancient remnant overseeing it. Only in this way would he be able to smoothly inquire about this corner of Hong. Information related to the general situation of the fragment of the wasteland. As they drank and chatted, Ping Yangshan and the other strongest cosmic light realm experts in the stronghold quickly brought up the situation around the mulberry orchid star, which was located in a radius of 1 trillion kilometers. Just as Yi Xian had guessed, the reason why the tens of millions of survivors of the primordial era who lived on this life planet did not know anything about the universe beyond 1 trillion li of space. The reason was that the place where they lived happened to be in the center of several starry forbidden zones. No matter which direction they headed in, they would eventually reach a forbidden area in the starry sky that was billions of miles in circumference. Even if they used all the power of their clan, they would never be able to cross this forbidden area in the starry sky. The nearest one was more than 40 million li away. And the furthest one was more than 80 million li away. The only thing they had in common was that each of these forbidden zones had 1 to 2 or 3 extremely powerful ferocious beasts guarding them. According to the starry sky realm, these extremely powerful ferocious beasts guarding the surrounding forbidden zones should all be immortal rank existences. Speaking of these extremely powerful immortal realm fierce beasts, Ping Yangshan and the other strongest experts of the village were full of helplessness, because it was their existence that prevented the tens of millions of survivors of the primordial era on Sangji star from leaving. At the same time, it was most likely because of them that they prevented the other survivors of the primordial era from entering the starry space outside. However, apart from feeling helpless about these extremely powerful immortal realm fierce beasts, they also felt a deep sense of powerlessness and fear. Among the tens of millions of survivors of the primordial era on Sangji Star, the strongest was only at the perfect level, 9-sector Lord Realm. There was not even a single universe-grade existence, so what could they do in the face of an immortal realm fierce beast that was an entire realm stronger than a universe-grade existence? They could only look at the ocean and sigh. However, this was obviously not a problem for Yi Xian. Immortal realm fierce beasts could not stop him from moving forward. In fact, with his current strength, Yi Xian could even fight head-on with a marquee-level immortal if he used all his supreme abilities and cultivation base. He could even defeat a marquee-level immortal. Thinking of this, he immediately made a decision. After a short stay on this mulberry tree star, he immediately left. He randomly chose a direction and passed through the so-called forbidden area tens of millions of kilometers away. He walked out of this sealed area that was like a cage in the starry sky and went to a wider area outside. To gather information in the starry sky, the only reason he decided to stay on Sangji Star for the time being was because the tens of millions of survivors of the primordial era who lived on this life star had inherited the secret technique of refining the great flesh medicine. Chapter 4174. The last day and a half passed by in the blink of an eye as people toasted each other and chatted from time to time. After 3 whole days of continuous refinement under the high temperature of the earth fire, it was finally time for this cauldron of flesh medicine to be opened. From the mouth of Pingyang Mountain, Yi Xian understood that the large and small villages of the tribe would only refine this kind of flesh and blood medicine 2 to 3 times a year. Every time the flesh and blood medicine was brewed, all the villagers in the village would be able to get different portions according to their cultivation base. As for the great medicine of blood and flesh, which was only distributed 3 times a year, the villagers would not drink it all at once. Instead, they would store it in some bottle-shaped storage magic treasures, just like how the starry sky masters of the 3 main planes treated the star core origin and other cultivation resources. They would slowly use them in the future. They would consume it. Because this kind of flesh medicine was the only resource for the survivors of the remote antiquity to improve their cultivation and evolve their life level. Of course, the flesh of the ferocious beasts of the starry sky, which was usually eaten as food, also had a certain effect on the evolution of life level and the improvement of the strength of the flesh and blood. However, it was obviously far from being comparable to the flesh medicine refined by the secret method of inheritance in the village. After hearing these words, Yi Xian suddenly looked forward to the completion of the flesh medicine in front of him. Since the purpose of refining the flesh of the ferocious beasts was not just to eat, but to use it as the only cultivation resource, then its effect should not be too disappointing. With this kind of expectation, Yi Xian immediately cast his eyes on the huge furnace in the central territory of the valley in front of him. Because at this moment, Ping Yangshan and several other experts of the Universal Light Realm who had been sitting around Yi Xian all stood up one after another and walked to the front of the furnace one after another. The people of Ping Yangshan village who were celebrating around them also stopped what they were doing and cast their eyes over there as if they had made an agreement. Their faces were full of eagerness and even admiration. At this moment, they seemed to be on a pilgrimage. After all, to them, this cauldron of medicine before them represented their cultivation resources for the next half a year. At this moment it was about to be completed, so it was unavoidable for everyone to be excited in their hearts. At this moment, it was already dawn. At the eastern side of the gorge, a fiery red sun was slowly rising, and it emanated a strand of golden radiance that illuminated the entire gorge and its surroundings in an extremely dazzling manner. An old woman who looked to be in her 60s or 70s slowly walked out from a small path in the valley under the protection of several female villagers. At this moment, all of the villagers cast gazes of reverence and admiration towards her. Even Ping Yangshan and the other cosmic light realm experts of the mountain-raising stronghold did the same. This scene caused Yi Xian to immediately roll his eyes. She was just an old woman at the universe realm. If one didn't know about her appearance, they would have thought that an undying emperor had come. The old woman's gaze swept across Ping Yangshan and the others before finally landing on Yi Xian. She smiled and nodded before looking away. This was considered a form of greeting. This made Yi Xian even more displeased. Even though this old woman had a very high status in the mountain-raising stronghold, she was still just a universe realm expert. Yi Xian's current cultivation base was at the universe grade. There was no other person like him on the entire mulberry tree star. How could this old woman act like this? Calm. Wasn't she taking advantage of her seniority too much? In fact, this old woman only looked old in terms of appearance. If they were to really compare age, she was afraid that she was far inferior to Yi Xian. Although he hadn't been in space for long, he had lived for so many years before entering the great cosmos world. Even he couldn't count how many years he had lived. Just as Yi Xian was feeling slightly displeased, the old woman suddenly appeared. Under the protection of a few female stronghold residents behind her, the old woman had already arrived in front of the black cauldron with a diameter of 1,000 meters. Obviously, as the person with the highest seniority in the mountain-raising stronghold, the opening ceremony of this cauldron of flesh medicine should be personally completed by this old woman. This made Yi Xian's impression of her even worse. Previously, during the 3 days of preparation and subsequent refinement of the entire cauldron of flesh medicine, this old woman hadn't contributed at all. She hadn't even shown her face once. Now that it was time to open the cauldron, she had come out to make her presence known. This was really infuriating. However, this was a matter of the stronghold, so Yi Xian didn't intend to stay there for long. Therefore, after pursing his lips, he threw this matter to the back of his mind. He had already decided that he would wait for this cauldron of flesh medicine to open and see its quality. If he was disappointed, then there was no need for him to stay any longer. He would just leave immediately. Right at this moment, the old woman standing in front of the black cauldron suddenly began to move. Her originally aged figure instantly became energetic. She took large strides and walked in front of the huge black cauldron. Her footsteps seemed to have a certain rhythm, giving people the feeling that she was walking on Yu's footsteps. Her hands were waving from time to time as she muttered to herself. Her 10 fingers were constantly forming some kind of finger seals. At a glance, she looked like an old thing who was dancing. But in fact, as she chanted silently and formed various finger seals with her 10 fingers, Yi Xian could clearly feel that in the area where she was standing, suddenly, the originally invisible field quietly occurred without any warning. It had changed. Could it be that, before this cauldron of flesh medicine is opened, it really needs some kind of special incantation or ceremony as the final closing ceremony? Only then can the cauldron of flesh medicine be successfully opened and the cauldron of flesh medicine finally be completed? As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Yi Xian immediately developed a strong interest in this old woman. He had even vaguely guessed the other party's overly arrogant demeanor and bearing from before. It was clear that this old woman was equivalent to a priest in some tribes in the flat mountain village. She should be in possession of the key secret arts that were passed down in the flat mountain village regarding the refinement of flesh and blood medicine. And this kind of existence, in a stronghold like the flat mountain stronghold which was a remnant of the primordial era, should have been passed down from generation to generation. As such, it created such a superior position in the stronghold. Even Ping Yangshan, as the leader of the stronghold, had to treat her with respect. After all, although Ping Yangshan was the leader of the stronghold, without this kind of existence similar to a priest in the tribe, he could not refine a cauldron of flesh medicine. All this was Yi Xian's guess at the moment. But if nothing unexpected happened, this guess should be the truth. Chapter 4175. Not far away, in front of the huge black cauldron that was 1,000 meters in radius, the old woman, who had been chanting while performing various hand seals, suddenly trembled and stopped abruptly. At the same time, she let out a violent roar. The finger gesture in her hand seemed to have reached the last one. As she shouted, she raised her right arm and flicked her finger, Xiao. As she flicked her finger, a green light shot out from her fingertip and went into the huge black cauldron in front of her. This seemingly inconspicuous green light, which was only the size of a finger, seemed to have drained a lot of energy and vitality from the old woman's body. As the green light shot out, she, who had always been full of vigor, became dispirited in an instant. She was so haggard that she seemed to have aged a few years suddenly. The few female strongholds who had been standing behind her immediately stepped forward at this time, supported her body, retreated to the back, and began to recuperate. All of this seemed to be very skillful and smooth. No one made a sound of surprise. Obviously, such a scene had long been common for all the strongholds present in the flat mountain stronghold. What shocked Yi Xian even more was the amazing change after the green light from the old woman's finger went into the huge black cauldron with a diameter of 1,000 meters. Even he subconsciously opened his mouth wide because of the strange scene that appeared in the next moment. His face was full of sluggishness. Roar. A clear dragon's roar rang out, followed closely by a tiger's roar that shook the forest. Accompanied by these two dragon roars and tiger roars, there were phantasms of a giant dragon and a winged black tiger rising from the top of the huge black cauldron with a radius of 1,000 meters. This scene was clearly the roar of a dragon and tiger. Soon, the phantasms of the giant dragon and the winged black tiger gradually dissipated when they rose about 100 meters above the cauldron. But the black cauldron below did not stop there. Similar phantasms were still rising from the cauldron one after another. There was a unicorn, a giant bear, a wolf, and other exotic beasts of various forms. All of them had extraordinary auras. At first glance, one could tell that they were ferocious beasts with pure bloodlines. Of course, they were all phantasms and did not really exist. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian instantly came to a realization. Obviously, the cause of all this was the wisp of azure light that the old woman from the mountain suppression stronghold shot into the cauldron. Perhaps it was also related to the talisman seals that she slapped into the bones of the cauldron earlier. This was an alchemy technique that came from the primordial era, and its effects had already been revealed now. It was capable of providing a terrifying amplification effect to the bloodline might contained within the flesh and blood materials that were used to refine the grand medicine within the cauldron. Yi Xian had seen all the ferocious beasts that the villagers of the flat mountain stronghold had thrown into the black cauldron earlier. Although they all carried the bloodlines of primordial beasts, the density of those bloodlines was far from enough to manifest the phantasms. Degree. Only ferocious beasts above the Star Lord state would be able to manifest the phantasms. However, thanks to the old woman's refining technique, the mediocre ferocious beasts were able to manifest the phantasms that only ferocious beasts above the Star Lord state could. The quality of the flesh and blood in the cauldron was greatly improved in an instant. It was simply unbelievable. It was unimaginable. Clang. Just as Yi Xian was in shock, the heavy cauldron beast of this black cauldron, which was 1,000 meters in diameter, had already been opened by the combined forces of Ping Yangshan and the other experts of the cosmic light realm and thrown to one side of the valley. In an instant, as the lid of the cauldron was opened, a dense mist spread out from the inside of the cauldron. After inhaling it, even Yi Xian felt refreshed, despite his current cultivation level. There was no doubt that the quality of the flesh and blood in the cauldron was quite good. Although it wasn't very effective for Yi Xian, it shouldn't be forgotten that the cauldron of flesh and blood was made from the flesh and blood of ferocious beasts that Yi Xian didn't care about at all, together with all kinds of herbs. According to his estimation, under normal circumstances, the flesh and blood medicine refined from this level of fierce beast material should be far less than half of the current medicinal effect. However, the reality was far beyond his expectations. The cauldron of great medicine had a slight effect on his current universe-grade cultivation. All of this was obviously due to the primordial refining technique that the old woman had mastered. At the thought of this, Yi Xian suddenly became excited. A cauldron of the most ordinary ferocious beast flesh and blood, together with all kinds of herbs, could actually be refined into such a miraculously effective flesh and blood medicine. Then, what if he refined it with the flesh and blood of various Star Lord, Domain Lord, Sector Lord, and even immortal-grade ferocious beasts that he had collected? There was no doubt that the effect would be even better. As for the flesh and blood of a Desolation Almighty or even a Quasi-Desolation Almighty, Yi Xian didn't even think about it. This black cauldron with a diameter of 1,000 meters simply wouldn't be able to withstand such a terrifying pressure. He was afraid that the entire cauldron would explode as soon as he threw in the flesh of a Quasi-Desolation Almighty. In order to refine the flesh and blood of a Quasi-Desolation Almighty, one had to use Yi Xian's farmer god cauldron to refine it. Furthermore, this couldn't be done by others because the farmer god cauldron's farmer god cauldron couldn't be controlled by the farmer god cauldron's farmer god cauldron. Only after Yi Xian mastered this refining technique could he use the farmer god cauldron to control the farmer god cauldron to refine it. When that time came, the power of the farmer god cauldron and the miraculous purification effect of the farmer god cauldron would definitely be heaven-defying. However, a flesh and blood medicine of that level would probably have to wait until Yi Xian's own cultivation broke through to the immortal level, or even the marquis or emperor level before he could consume it. After all, the flesh and blood of a quasi-desolation almighty was used to refine the flesh and blood of a quasi-desolation almighty. Even with his current universe-level power, he definitely wouldn't be able to withstand it and would be in danger of exploding. Even though I can't refine the quasi-desolation almighty, quasi-desolation almighty, quasi-desolation almighty, undying and below undying is no problem at all. Even the black cauldron of this flat mountain stronghold should be able to withstand it. As he muttered to himself, Yi Xian was eager to give it a try. He almost didn't hesitate to make a decision. He asked the old woman from the flat mountain stronghold to help him provide the flesh of various fierce beasts from the Star Lord level to the immortal level. With the help of the black cauldron of the stronghold's inheritance, he refined a furnace. Chapter 4176. When this cauldron of flesh medicine was completed, the thousands of Ping Mountain village members all around the valley cheered thunderously. To them, this cauldron of flesh medicine represented half a year's worth of cultivation resources. Now that they were about to get a share of it, they were naturally very excited. Soon, Ping Yangshan personally took out some flesh medicine from the large black cauldron. Some of it was sent to the recovering cosmic realm old woman, while some of it was sent to Yi Xian personally by Ping Yangshan. At the same time, a few other cosmic light grade tribe leaders of Ping Mountain Village surrounded the large black cauldron and started to distribute the flesh medicine from the large black cauldron to the members of the village who were lined up like a long dragon. These flesh medicine would be stored away by each of the village members. They would only take a small sip of it when they cultivated in the future to aid in their cultivation. A large bowl was sent to Yi Xian. It was only slightly bigger than a fist, but this bowl was obviously a magic treasure. Its true capacity was at least 100 cubic meters. In order to rope in a universe-grade super old monster like him, Pingyang Mountain had spent a lot of effort to refine a furnace of flesh medicine. They didn't even blink as they directly gave Yi Xian over 100 cubic meters, saying that they would let Yi Xian taste it. If he was satisfied, the black cauldron behind him would let him take as much flesh medicine as he wanted. Yi Xian nodded but did not comment. Then, he lowered his head and looked at the bowl. The quality of the flesh medicine in the large bowl on the table in front of him was indeed extraordinary. It was a translucent amber color and exuded a rich energy aura. There was also a dazzling glow emitting from it from time to time. Yi Xian took another large, ordinary bowl and poured a small bowl into it. He drank it all in one gulp and pushed the rest back. Although these 100+ cubic meters of flesh and blood medicine were extraordinary and their quality far exceeded the value of the raw materials used to refine the flesh and blood, they weren't of much use to Yi Xian's current cultivation level. He definitely did not want to deprive some of the Ping Mountain Village members of their cultivation resources for the next half a year just because of a momentary desire for food. "Senior, what are you?" Seeing that Yi Xian had only tasted a small bowl before pushing the large bowl that contained over 100 cubic meters of magic treasure over, Ping Yangshan was stunned for a moment before a disappointed expression appeared on his face. He wanted to say something, but hesitated. "The taste is not bad, but this level of flesh medicine is not very useful to me. I wonder if Camp Master Ping can help me refine another cauldron. Of course, all the flesh materials and various medicinal herbs will be provided by me." Speaking up to here, Yi Xian lightly smiled. "In return, Qiao will take 10% of the flesh and blood medicine and gift it to your village." This. Ping Yangshan was stunned. Then, his breathing quickened. He was well aware of the high efficacy of the flesh medicine refined from the flesh and herbs provided by a universe-grade powerhouse. To put it bluntly, let alone his Ping Shan camp, even the 12 camps on Mulberry Ji Star would probably be able to produce the same effect as the flesh medicine. Even the large tribes might not be able to obtain such a great flesh medicine. In his opinion, the other party was simply giving away 10% of the flesh medicine as a reward. It was as if a mountain of gold had fallen from the sky and landed on his head. However, Ping Yangshan shook his head and smiled bitterly. Senior, it's not that I don't agree, but the ability of the old priestess is limited. That cauldron just now has already greatly damaged her vitality. I'm afraid it will take at least 1 or 2 months to recover. Also, the blood of the ferocious beasts is too strong. I'm afraid this kind of earth core fire won't be able to melt it. The temperature is not high enough. You don't have to worry about the flames. I have my own way of dealing with it. As for that fellow Taoist. Speaking up to here, Yi Xian lightly smiled. He waved his hand and shot out a strand of milky white light. With this thing, she will be able to immediately recover her exhausted vitality. Furthermore, her cultivation will also improve because of this. Not to mention refining another furnace. Even if she refines another 3 or 5 furnaces, it won't be a problem. What was sent out by Yi Xian was a netherworld furnace lotion the size of a human head. He had a lot of this kind of thing in his hands. He usually used it for bathing. Such a small amount had almost no effect on the current Yi Xian. However, for the old priestess, whose cultivation strength was only in the universe realm, and it was the first time she used this thing, its significance was completely different. She was recovering after taking a small cup of flesh medicine. Suddenly, she saw a milky white liquid shoot to her eyes and stop in front of her. She was stunned. Then, her expression quickly became excited, and even her breathing became rapid. Although she didn't know what this thing was, she could still sense the energy contained in it. With excitement, the old priestess carefully took out a jade bottle and collected about 70% of the netherworld furnace lotion, leaving 30%. She opened her mouth and swallowed it into her stomach. Then, she closed her eyes, sat cross-legged, and began to refine. Yi Xian was not in a hurry. He waited patiently. He was still very confident about the effect of the netherworld furnace lotion. In a short 10 minutes, the old priest abruptly opened her eyes. Her originally dispirited expression had long since disappeared. She leaped up and fiercely charged towards Yi Xian. With a plop, she knelt in front of him, cupped her hands, and bowed. Thank you, Senior, for your kindness in nurturing me. Before, her cultivation strength was only in the 5th level of the universe realm. But now, she had reached the perfection of the 9th level of the universe realm. This was not only due to the netherworld furnace lotion. It should be a combination of the flesh medicine she had just taken and the amazing effect of the breakthrough at the same time. On the side, Ping Yangshan and the other universal realm experts of the mountain-raising stronghold were already stunned. Each of them had their mouths wide open and were completely stunned. In just 10 minutes, the priestess of the stronghold had reached the perfection of the universe realm. Even if it happened in front of them, they still felt a sense of disbelief. Since your vitality has been restored, then help me refine a cauldron of flesh medicine. I have already agreed with camp leader Ping that after the refinement is completed, your mountain-raising stronghold can take 10% as a reward. As for the temperature of the cauldron, you don't have to worry. If the temperature of the earth core fire is not enough, then I will naturally do it. At this point, the old priestess who was kneeling in front of him nodded repeatedly. Coincidentally, the flesh medicine in the black cauldron in front of them had been distributed, so the cauldron was empty again. Therefore, Yi Xian did not hesitate any longer. With a wave of his hand, he took out various sealed caves in the depths of the volcano in the Shenong Dingyang domain. He took out a large number of remains of ancient creatures. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Chapter 4177. This time, Yi Xian was going to refine the flesh medicine just to push his cultivation level from the current universe rank 1 to the peak of the universe rank 9 as soon as possible. Therefore, there was no need to use the remains of the primordial creatures that were too advanced. In fact, it would have been useless even if Yi Xian had taken out the remains of the primordial creatures that were too advanced. The black cauldron of the flat mountain village wouldn't have been able to withstand it at all. The cauldron would have exploded in an instant if a quasi-primordial almighty was thrown in. This time, he had only taken out slightly more than 100 corpses, and they were all the smaller ones that he had picked out from the tens of thousands of corpses that were at the Star-Lord level and above. Otherwise, the cauldron, which was only 1,000 meters in diameter and didn't have a larger space inside, wouldn't have been able to hold more than 100 corpses of primordial creatures. Even so, when the remains of more than 100 treasures were thrown into the black cauldron one after another, Ping Yangshan and the rest of the Flat Mountain Village villagers were still shocked to the point of being dumbfounded. Every one of the corpses of primordial creatures had an extremely pure bloodline. The weakest ones were at the Star Lord level and the Domain Lord level, while the majority were masters and universe grades from the outer realms. As for the strongest ones, they were 9 ordinary immortal corpses. When Yi Xian took out the 9 corpses and threw them into the black cauldron, Ping Yangshan and the old woman were so shocked that they fell to the ground. They were dumbfounded, as if they had been struck by lightning on the spot. When they looked at Yi Xian again, even their expressions had become extremely strange. They were probably muttering in their hearts. Yi Xian was only at the universe rank, so how exactly did he kill the immortal primordial creatures? Even though Yi Xian had already tried his best to choose the smallest of these 100 or so corpses, after throwing them into the black cauldron, he still filled the cauldron to 80% full. The rest required the spirit spring water and various precious materials and medicines, so Yi Xian stopped throwing the corpses into the black cauldron. Put them in. After a brief moment of shock, Ping Yangshan and the other higher-ups of the Flat Mountain Village quickly became excited. They ordered the villagers to start a new round of medicine refinement. Everything unfolded in an orderly manner. Some of the villagers began to pour spirit spring water into the cauldron, while others began to activate the earth fire. Yi Xian, after asking the old woman whether the various precious materials and medicines thrown into the cauldron were carefully chosen, he quickly threw a large number of high-grade precious materials and treasures into the cauldron. Precious materials and medicines that even the old woman had never seen before were thrown into the cauldron of the mountain village. After everything was completed, Yi Xian suddenly waved his hand, and the huge and heavy cauldron lid instantly covered the black cauldron. At this moment, the raging earth core fire had already shot up. However, according to the old priest woman, this level of precious medicine and treasure body remains, just the earth core fire alone probably wouldn't be enough. It was enough to completely melt the cauldron. This time, the refinement would still take about 3 days. That's good. I need to leave for a day and find a secluded place nearby to do some preparations. I'll return in a day. I'll have a way to deal with the temperature of the cauldron. After he finished speaking, Yi Xian left the valley where the Flat Mountain stronghold lived. He found an abyss 1,000 miles away and began to refine the level 20 liquid. Yi Xian had 5 portions of the top-grade materials for refining the level 20 liquid, such as the 10,000 years jade fragrance Ganoderma, the scorching star sun grass, and the demon evil rattan. He planned to use a day to refine all 5 portions of the materials and treasures. After he was ready, he quickly took out the flesh and blood of the one phoenix treasure body of a quasi-primordial Grand Master. After being carefully refined by the Shenong 4-colored flame, it turned into a round ball that emitted green and red light. He took out a portion of the flesh and blood essence that was condensed. Although the blood and flesh elixir didn't look very impressive, it was actually the essence of the blood and flesh elixir of a gigantic one phoenix. It had shattered the chains of order and was then reassembled. Under the refinement of the Shenong 4-colored flame, the chains of order in the one phoenix's blood and flesh elixir had completely collapsed. A miniature black hole had even appeared, completely collapsing. It could be said that it contained a terrifying amount of blood and flesh energy. However, this was only the first step in refining the blood and flesh elixir. It could only be considered a half-finished product. If one wanted to refine the level 20 liquid, they had to use this blood and flesh elixir as a base. Then, they had to add in all kinds of rare materials and resources. During this process, Yi Xian had the experience of refining the level 17, 18, and 19 liquid elixirs. At this moment, it could be said that he was very familiar with the process. Everything was quickly completed. It only took Yi Xian 2 hours to successfully refine the first tube of level 20 liquid. However, this kind of top-notch gene cultivation liquid would undoubtedly attract a heavenly tribulation. Then, it took another 2 hours to resist the heavenly tribulation. However, this time, Yi Xian's cultivation base didn't increase because of this. It was obvious that after experiencing the baptism of the heavenly tribulation multiple times, the tempering effect of the heavenly tribulation on his physical body was getting weaker and weaker. Next, the second tube of level 20 liquid failed. The discarded gene fluid was thrown into the waste liquid energy ball by Yi Xian. Then, without any delay, he started to refine the third tube. Next, Yi Xian successfully refined the next 3 tubes of level 20 liquid. After experiencing the baptism of the heavenly tribulation 3 times, his cultivation base, which had been stagnant for a long time, made a breakthrough once again. However, this time, it was only a small breakthrough. When Yi Xian passed through the last liquid tribulation and opened his eyes with a bright light, the system prompt that he was looking forward to sounded out in his mind, ding. Congratulations to the host for breaking through the ancient void technique. Current cultivation base, Universe 2 grade. Ding. Congratulations to the host for breaking through the physical body's chi and blood boundary. Current cultivation base, Universe 2 grade. Previously, when his physical body had been at the Universe 1 grade, his strength had soared again to the Universe 2 grade after activating the 3-headed, 6-armed ancient demon ape bloodline. If he used the 9 demon ape transformations again and reached the 5th transformation, he would instantly reach the combat strength of a Universe 7 grade. Every transformation would increase his strength by a small level. Now, Yi Xian's physical body had broken through another small level and reached the Universe 2 grade. This meant that after activating the ancient demon ape bloodline, his cultivation base would reach the Universe 3 grade in the state of the ancient demon ape. Once he entered the 5th transformation of the ancient demon ape, his peak combat strength would reach the Universe 8 grade. He was only a small level away from reaching the peak of the 9 grade. Chapter 4178. By the time they returned to the small valley where the flat mountain stronghold residents lived, the refinement of the second batch of flesh medicine had only been going on for a day. Yi Xian definitely did not know that the 4 consecutive liquid tribulations he had triggered on the mulberry tree while concocting the level 20 liquid had already shaken the entire mulberry tree. Moreover, even in a forbidden area in the starry sky tens of millions of kilometers away from mulberry tree, 2 powerful immortal realm fierce beasts had caught the aura of the liquid tribulation and were leading a powerful army of fierce beasts in the starry sky, rumbling as they approached. After a day, the various precious medicines and the remains of the treasured body in the black cauldron had not even completely melted. After all, the grade of the earth core fire was too low, and its temperature did not meet the conditions to refine this level of great medicine. It was precisely because of this that no matter if it was Ping Yangshan and the other cosmic realm experts that flattened the mountain stronghold or the female priest that still hadn't started executing the medicine refinement technique passed down in the stronghold, all of them seemed to be slightly worried. They were obviously worried that the refinement of this batch of flesh medicine would fail. If that happened, not only would they not get the 10,000 reward, but they might also anger that supreme universe-grade powerhouse. If that happened, it would be tantamount to a disaster for the flat mountain stronghold if the other party was enraged. Yi Xian saw the worried expressions on everyone's faces and smiled bitterly. He did not take it to heart. After landing in the valley, he immediately waved his hand and guided a wisp of the Shenong 7-colored flame from the Shenong cauldron into the interior of the large black cauldron. The reason why Yi Xian did not heat up the cauldron's walls like the earth core fire was because he was worried that the large black cauldron would not be able to withstand the heat. Given its material, the Shenong 7-colored flame would probably melt as soon as it was refined. By letting the wisp of the Shenong 7-colored flame enter the black cauldron, Yi Xian's careful control would not only cause no damage to the large black cauldron, but the effect of heating it would also be faster. This is a high-level alien flame? Ping Yangshan and the female priest were shocked when they saw Yi Xian summon a wisp of dazzling 7-colored flame with a wave of his hand and directly enter the large black cauldron. Excitement appeared on their faces. Although they had never seen the Shenong cauldron before, they had used this large black cauldron to refine flesh medicine their entire lives. They knew that the Shenong 7-colored flame was definitely an extraordinary item just by looking at its dazzling 7-colored flame. Senior, not only will all the precious blood, flesh, and precious materials in this cauldron of flesh medicine be yours, but even the high-level alien flame to refine of these materials will also be yours. Ping Yangshan shook his head. Is shameful. If you continue to be so hesitant, this Qiao will leave immediately after refining this cauldron of flesh medicine. I won't stay any longer. What he meant was that after refining this cauldron of flesh medicine, it was very likely that he would continue to stay in the Ping Yangshan village. This was exactly what Ping Yangshan was looking forward to. After he comprehended this layer of meaning, he was stunned for a moment before he was overjoyed. He excused himself from Yi Xian and immediately retreated in high spirits. With the addition of the Shenong seven-colored flame, the various precious materials and remains in the large black cauldron quickly melted away. Originally, he still needed 2 more days of refining, but in just a short 4 hours, he had already completed it. The people of the Ping Yangshan village were obviously more experienced in refining this kind of flesh medicine than Yi Xian. Seeing the slight changes in the cauldron, the female priest immediately stood up and looked at Yi Xian in a daze. After a long time, she exclaimed in shock, "Senior, what is that alien flame you just threw into the cauldron? It's already out of the cauldron. This speed, isn't it too fast? Is it going to be out of the cauldron? Then, quickly take it back, lest the medicine is burnt." Hearing this, Yi Xian trembled and quickly withdrew the strand of Shenong's 7-colored flame back into the Shenong cauldron within his body. The female priest took a deep look at Yi Xian. Without hesitation, she immediately began the final step. Her originally aged figure instantly became as vigorous as a dragon and ferocious as a tiger. She took large strides and walked in front of the huge black cauldron. Her footsteps seemed to have a certain rhythm, giving people the feeling that she was stepping on Yubu, and her hands were waving from time to time. Her mouth was chanting, and her 10 fingers were constantly forming some kind of finger gesture. At a glance, it was as if she was dancing. Soon, with her chanting and her 10 fingers forming various finger gestures, Yi Xian clearly felt that the originally invisible field in the area where he was standing suddenly changed without warning. Hey! After a while, the old woman, who had been walking with the steps of you like a dancing god, suddenly trembled. At the same time, she stopped abruptly. There was a violent shout coming out of her mouth. The finger gesture in her hand seemed to have reached the last one. At the same time, she suddenly raised her right arm, stretched out, and flicked her finger, Xiao. A green light shot out from her fingertip and entered the huge black cauldron in front of her. This seemingly inconspicuous green light, which was only the size of a fingertip, seemed to have sucked away a large amount of strength and vitality from the old woman's body. As the green light shot out, she, who had always been full of vigor, became extremely weak. Once again, she became dispirited in an instant. Although the degree of haggardness was not as bad as the previous time, as if she had aged a few years in an instant, it was obviously not ordinary fatigue. The few female village people who had been standing behind her immediately stepped forward at this time, supported her body, and retreated to the back. Then, the old woman took out the netherworld furnace lotion that Yi Xian had given her and began to recuperate. This time, the primordial creatures that rushed out of the black cauldron were even more shocking. The figures of true dragons and fire phoenixes soared into the sky, and could be clearly seen from tens of thousands of miles away. At this moment, in the distance, there were some sector lord realm experts searching for something aimlessly. Attracted by the strange phenomenon here, they all gathered over in an instant. More than a dozen figures, all of them sector lord old monsters, were the strongest of the 12 tribes of the desolation survivors on Mulberry Tree Star. The reason why they came here at the same time was because when Yi Xian was concocting the level 20 liquid, he had attracted the liquid tribulation 4 times in a row. However, after Yi Xian finished refining, he directly left the small valley. The aura of the liquid tribulation disappeared, so these dozen sector lord old monsters were unable to determine his location. Chapter 4179. Heavens, there's actually a Mahayana realm senior in the small village below. Also, what is the grade of this cauldron of flesh medicine? Why does this old man have a feeling of fear and trepidation? This must have been personally refined by that Mahayana realm senior, and its quality far surpasses that of the flesh medicine refined by our 12 tribes. Look at the phenomenon of the dragon roars and phoenix cries that shook the heavens, it's simply shocking. However, why didn't Senior do the final medicine control technique himself? He actually let a weak universe realm priest of this small village do it. This is at least half as effective. It's simply a waste of God's gift. How can we guess the actions of an expert? In this old man's opinion, Senior must have a deeper meaning. Amidst the exclamations, the dozen or so upper echelons from the 12 tribes of Mulberry Tree quickly landed, but they didn't dare to enter the small valley where the flat mountain village lived. Instead, they stood at the periphery of the valley, looking inside. The leader of the flat mountain village and the other upper echelons of the flat mountain village had already noticed their arrival. Among them, there was a sector lord old monster who was their immediate superior. He was the core upper echelon of the large tribe that the flat mountain village belonged to. If it were any other time, they would have rushed over respectfully to welcome them and kowtowed. However, at this moment, because Yi Xian was here, and the cauldron of flesh medicine had just been opened, it was inconvenient for them to leave. Therefore, after exchanging glances, the people of Pingyang Mountain could only brace themselves and stay behind. Yi Xian sighed. Clang! As Yi Xian waved his hand, the lid of the black cauldron flew up and landed on the ground of the valley. Immediately after, a purple mist instantly filled the cauldron. Some of the flat mountain village villagers in the valley only took a big whiff of the purple mist, and a rumbling sound came from their bodies. They actually broke through on the spot. Of course, this kind of situation would only appear in some very weak existences. At Yi Xian's level, it was absolutely impossible. The entire black cauldron's internal volume was 1,000 cubic meters. The previous cauldron of flesh medicine was 900 cubic meters of amber liquid when it came out of the furnace. But this time, when the lid of the cauldron flew up, only half of the flesh medicine appeared, which was only 500 cubic meters. This was clearly caused by the purification power of the Shenong 7-colored flame. Although there was less medicinal liquid, its medicinal effect had increased by a lot. There's a total of 500 cubic meters of medicinal paste. You can take 50 cubic meters. This Qiao has already said before, so stop wasting my time. With a wave of his hand, Yi Xian directly swept up 450 cubic meters of flesh medicine from the cauldron and stored it in a small spatial bottle before keeping it in his undying world. Hiss, this cauldron of medicine. Heavens, it's actually the purple infected amber divine medicine. As soon as Yi Xian finished speaking, Pingyang Shan extended his head to look into the black cauldron. When he saw that there was only a shallow layer of flesh and blood medicine left at the bottom of the cauldron, he immediately cried out in alarm. Immediately after, he used a small transparent cup to collect a small cup from the cauldron, and brought it in front of the old priestess at the side. He was so excited that his body started to tremble. Priestess, purple amber, it's actually purple amber divine medicine. We actually refined purple amber divine medicine. The first batch of flesh medicine that he had refined before was a pale yellow translucent gelatinous substance. It was like a thick medicinal paste. This time, although the medicinal paste was still semi-liquid and semi-transparent, its color was deep purple. Moreover, it was emitting a purple treasure light. Suddenly, it looked like a cup of blood. Looking at it, it was indeed like a huge purple amber. No wonder it was called the Purple Amber Divine Medicine by Ping Yangshan. The old priestess was so excited that she couldn't speak. She cast a grateful look at Yi Xian, nodded slightly and thanked him. Then, she immediately swallowed the small cup of purple amber divine medicine that was about the size of a fist into her stomach, and then began to refine it on the spot. There was no doubt that with this purple amber divine medicine, her cultivation strength that had already broken through to the 9th rank perfection of the universe realm would definitely break through again. She would definitely become a star lord old monster in one fell swoop. Seeing that the old priestess had swallowed a small cup of purple amber divine medicine and began to break through, Ping Yangshan's body suddenly trembled as if he thought of something. He immediately howled, "All the people, come to the black cauldron. The 50 cubic meters of purple amber divine medicine that Senior gave us will enter now. Every clan member will have a share." Hearing these words, Yi Xian was startled for a moment, then he turned his head thoughtfully and glanced at the dozen sector lord old monsters outside the valley. When these dozen sector lord old monsters had just arrived, he already knew, but he didn't pay attention to them at all. Now, looking at Ping Yangshan's actions, it was obvious that even the 12 tribes of mulberry tree behind these dozen sector Lord Old monsters couldn't refine this kind of purple amber divine medicine. The reason why Ping Yangshan immediately gathered all the clansmen to come and share it was obviously because he was worried that the 50 cubic meters of blood flesh medicine in the black cauldron would be remembered by the dozen sector Lord Old monsters outside the valley. After all, they were all people of status. Even if they coveted the purple amber medicine, if Ping Yang Mountain had already distributed it to all the people of Ping Shan village, they probably wouldn't covet it anymore. Otherwise, their table manners would be too unsightly. However, Yi Xian was still a little worried about this matter. He didn't want to bring a disaster to the villagers of Ping Yangshan stronghold because of this matter. What's more, sooner or later, he would have to come into contact with these dozen sector Lord Old monsters. The priests of each of the 12 tribes on Mulberry Tree had different alchemy techniques in their hands. Many of them were obviously incomplete, and the most complete one should be in the hands of the 12 tribes. In the hands of the priests. Yi Xian was determined to obtain these alchemy techniques. He couldn't rely on others to refine this kind of blood-flesh medicine every time, right? Thinking of this, Yi Xian immediately waved his hand towards the outside of the valley. Fellow Taoists, since you're here, why don't we enter the valley and meet? It just so happens that I've just refined a batch of flesh and blood medicine, so meeting each other is fate. I'll naturally give you a portion, but there's not much, so I hope you don't reject it. As he spoke, more than a dozen small storage bottles shot out with a wave of his hand. Each of them contained 10 cubic meters of purple amber divine medicine. Just this one time, the 450 cubic meters of purple amber divine medicine in Yi Xian's hand was reduced by nearly a third. However, he didn't care at all. He didn't put this level of blood-flesh medicine in his eyes. It was only effective before the immortal realm. After using it this time, the effect would be much weaker next time. Chapter 4180. After accepting the 10 cubic meters of purple amber medicine that Yi Xian generously gifted, the dozen or so realm Lord Old monsters from the 12 great tribes of Mulberry Tree Star were incomparably polite. They all cupped their hands towards Yi Xian as a junior and loudly thanked him. In fact, even without the 10 cubic meters of purple amber medicine, they would still be the same in front of Yi Xian. After all, the difference in cultivation strength between the two sides was there. Although Yi Xian was only a universe second order, he could still take care of more than a dozen realm Lord Old monsters. It was completely possible. The reason why Yi Xian had expressed goodwill to these dozen or so realm Lord Old monsters was because of the complete alchemy techniques in the hands of the 12 tribes. However, this matter wasn't something that could be obtained just by opening his mouth. Yi Xian wasn't prepared to use force, so he wasn't in a hurry. On the contrary, the level 20 liquid had already been successfully concocted, and even the extremely effective purple amber great medicine had more than 300 cubic meters in his hands. Therefore, the breakthrough in his cultivation was in his eyes. Therefore, the cultivation breakthrough seemed to have become even more urgent. With this thought in mind, Yi Xian immediately cupped his hands and said, "Everyone, this Qiao's purple amber medicine has just come out of the furnace. I need to test its effects. I can take this opportunity to break through." The meaning behind his words was clearly that he could not chat for the time being. After this breakthrough was completed, he would talk to everyone in detail. The group of realm Lord Old monsters were quite tactful. They immediately cupped their hands and appeared to be extremely attentive. "Senior, are you going to break through?" TSK, how enviable. I believe that after this seclusion, when I see Senior again, you will already be at the 3rd level of the Mahayana realm. We are far inferior. However, although our cultivation strength is too weak, we can still protect Senior. Senior, rest assured and enter seclusion. Leave the matters outside to us. This group of family members was clearly very interested in Yi Xian. They had no intention of leaving for a while and actually proposed to protect Yi Xian on the spot. The latter did not mind. After nodding, he did not say anything else. With a flash, he had already arrived at the small valley where he had concocted the level 20 liquid in seclusion. After waving his hand to summon a large array, Yi Xian directly took out the Shinong cauldron in his body. Of course, it was only in its condensed state of 1,000 feet. Otherwise, this mulberry tree star would probably collapse and not be able to hold it at all. Regardless of whether the dozen or so realm lords outside had any other intentions, with the protection of the Shinong cauldron, Yi Xian would be safe and sound. Immediately, his figure flew to the mouth of the cauldron that was enshrouded in 9-colored fog. He immediately sat down cross-legged and took out the small spatial bottle that contained more than 300 cubic meters of purple amber medicine. He opened his mouth and directly sucked in 200 cubic meters of it, condensing it into a purple to black medicinal liquid that was in his limbs and bones. As the extremely concentrated purple amber great medicine circulated within Yi Xian's body, the roars of dragons and tigers instantly sounded out from within his body. The movements were extremely loud, and his entire body's 1.08 billion pores were emitting strands of purple light. From time to time, there would be strong strands of purple light emitting from them. Occasionally, the shadow of an ancient being rose from the top of his head. However, all these strange phenomena were controlled by the power of the Shinong cauldron's domain. They were concealed and did not leak out. Otherwise, it would have caused an even more shocking commotion. During this process, his cultivation base and strength were also constantly rising. The sea of consciousness in his mind was also surging. Under the impact of this extremely condensed black-purple medicinal liquid, the vast range of Yi Xian's sea of consciousness was rapidly expanding at a speed visible to the naked eye. Increase. After an unknown period of time, when Yi Xian opened his eyes with a bright light, the system beep that he was looking forward to sounded out in his mind. Moreover, it was densely packed, and a series of sounds rang out incessantly. Ding! Congratulations to the host for breaking through the ancient void technique. Current realm, universe grade level 3. Ding! Congratulations to the host for breaking through the physical body blood boundary. Current realm, universe grade level 3. Similar system notifications kept ringing. When Yi Xian was a little numb, the last sentence finally came. Ding! Congratulations to the host for breaking through the ancient void technique. Current realm, universe grade level 9 perfection. Ding! Congratulations to the host for breaking through the physical body blood boundary. Current realm, universe grade level 9 perfection. Universe grade level 9 perfection. As this thought flashed through his mind, Yi Xian clenched his fists tightly. Without any hesitation, he immediately took out the 4 tubes of level 20 liquid that he had refined not long ago. He picked out the best one and poured it into his mouth. Then, he swallowed 5 drops of all evil origin liquid and various other top-notch resources before closing his eyes to refine them and start breaking through to the unlucky boundary. The medicinal effects and energy of this level 20 liquid were definitely not inferior to the 200 cubic meters of purple amber medicine that Yi Xian had swallowed earlier. After being condensed to the extreme, the black and purple medicinal liquid formed from the 200 cubic meters of purple amber medicine was extremely concentrated. After all, this tube of level 20 liquid had been refined using the remains of a powerful desolate era being and the Shinong 4-colored flames. At this moment, as the level 20 liquid entered his stomach and began to quickly circulate within Yi Xian's body, a large number of dense sounds of chains rattling could be heard from within his body. As mentioned before, there were 2 major hurdles in the path of cultivation for a starry sky powerhouse. The first was when one broke through to become a universe almighty, while the second was when one broke through to become an immortal old freak. Yi Xian had successfully crossed the first hurdle. Now, the second hurdle on the path of evolution had finally arrived. However, even though the second hurdle was more difficult, given Yi Xian's foundation and the overbearing medicinal efficacy of the level 20 liquid, it was obviously not a problem for him to successfully cross this hurdle. After a short 6 hours, he opened his eyes once again. In his mind, the familiar sound of the system notification rang out once more. Ding! Congratulations to the host for breaking through the ancient void technique. Current realm, level 1 immortal realm. Ding! Congratulations to the host for breaking through the physical body's chi and blood boundary. Current realm, level 1 immortal realm. Before this seclusion, Yi Xian's original body had been at the universe 2nd grade. However, once he activated the three-headed, six-armed ancient demon ape bloodline, his strength soared again and directly reached the universe third grade. If he used the 9 demon ape transformations and reached the 5th transformation, he would instantly reach the combat strength of a universe 8th grade. Every transformation would increase his strength by a small level. But now, as Yi Xian's original body made consecutive breakthroughs, he finally stepped into the immortal realm. Once he activated the ancient demon ape bloodline in his body, his three-headed, six-armed ancient demon ape true form would instantly reach the 2nd level of the immortal realm. If he entered the 5th transformation of the ancient demon ape, his peak combat strength would reach the 7th level of the immortal realm. Chapter 4181. The first level of the immortal realm, Yi Xian had finally broken through and become an immortal realm old monster. At this moment, he was extremely excited. Recalling all the things that had happened since he entered the starry sky, he was filled with endless emotions. At this moment, in the sky above his head, there was a sudden clap of thunder without warning, rumble. Looking up, his line of sight passed through the concealment power of the Shenong Cauldron's field and the formation screen of the valley. He instantly saw that in the extremely high sky above his head, there was an extremely thick and black tribulation cloud that was rapidly gathering. That was the source of the rumbling thunder just now. Yi Xian was enlightened. The immortal tribulation was coming. Although there was no untainted heavenly way in this corner of the fragment of the desolate world, the order and law of heaven and earth were still there. Therefore, the heavenly tribulation would still come. The reason why the liquid tribulation appeared before was also because of this reason. The heavenly tribulation would descend upon the 2 great thresholds of the starry sky. The universe tribulation when one entered the universe realm was also called the minor heavenly tribulation. The 2nd threshold to enter the immortal realm, once crossed, would lead to the immortal tribulation, also known as the Great Heavenly Tribulation. Now, Yi Xian's cultivation strength had broken through to the immortal realm. He was truly an immortal realm old monster. The only thing he needed was the baptism of the Great Heavenly Tribulation. To him, this so-called immortal Great Heavenly Tribulation was both a test and an opportunity. After the baptism of the Heavenly Tribulation, the realm he had just broken through would be completely consolidated. In this regard, Yi Xian naturally did not decline. However, the mulberry star was not suitable for the heavenly tribulation. Even if this planet could withstand the tribulation thunder of the immortal tribulation, it was absolutely inevitable that it would be damaged to a certain extent by this heavenly tribulation. The survivors of the desolation era on the mulberry star were already having a hard time. Yi Xian did not want to make things worse for them. Therefore, he decided to go to the void outside the atmosphere of the mulberry star to undergo the heavenly tribulation. The space there was more spacious, and it was more convenient for him to use all kinds of means. He could be completely unrestrained. Thinking of this, Yi Xian immediately stood up and waved his hand to keep the Shenong Cauldron under his feet into his body. Then, he removed the formation and stepped out. As he walked out of the valley, the lightning tribulation that was gathering in the sky far above his head moved with him. It was obvious that it had already locked onto Yi Xian's body. At this moment, with the removal of the array, Yi Xian immediately saw the situation outside the valley. Faces filled with shock and astonishment entered his line of sight. This place was a certain distance away from the Flat Mountain stronghold, so he didn't see many of the Flat Mountain stronghold's villagers. However, Ping Yangshan and a few other cosmic light realm upper echelons of the Flat Mountain stronghold were here. Other than that, there were the dozen sector lord old monsters known as Yi Xian's protectors. They had originally thought that Yi Xian had only broken through from the Mahayana realm to the universe realm level 3. However, only half a day had passed. When Yi Xian appeared again, his cultivation base had already reached the immortal realm level 1. Oh, that was what the survivors of the primordial era called him. The immortal realm was also known as the heavenly tribulation realm. This was in line with the characteristics of an immortal realm heavenly tribulation. From the universe realm level 2 to the immortal realm level 1, Yi Xian had broken through a total of 8 small grades, which was equivalent to an entire realm. This sort of thing rarely happened even to him. It had only happened 2 or 3 times. For the survivors of the primordial era on Mulberry Tree, this was no different from a fantasy. It was no wonder that all of them looked like they had seen a ghost. Senior, you broke through to the heavenly tribulation realm? Oh my God, strike me with a bolt of lightning. Half a day ago, I was still at the Mahayana realm level 2. How long has it been? I've actually become a heavenly tribulation realm level 1. It can't be wrong. Otherwise, how do you explain the tribulation clouds in the sky? What a freak. However, this is a good thing. Congratulations, Senior. I'm sure you will be able to survive this heavenly tribulation easily given your means. As Yi Xian walked over, the dumbfounded crowd finally regained their senses. They all cupped their hands and congratulated him one after another with strange expressions on their faces. The power of this heavenly tribulation is probably not small. Although mulberry tree can withstand it, it will still be somewhat affected. Therefore, I will go to the void outside the atmosphere to undergo the heavenly tribulation. You don't have to follow me. After nodding, Yi Xian didn't say anything else. With a flash of his body, he immediately rushed into the sky. In the blink of an eye, he rushed out of mulberry tree's atmosphere and arrived in the void outside the planet's atmosphere. Moreover, he had deliberately kept a distance of over 10 million miles away before stopping. As his body moved, the thick black tribulation clouds that had originally appeared in the upper layer of mulberry tree's atmosphere also strangely moved outside the planet's atmosphere. They still hung above Yi Xian's head and firmly locked onto his aura. This wasn't the first time Yi Xian had experienced a heavenly tribulation. It could even be said that he was already used to it. Just half a day ago, he had experienced 4 waves of heavenly tribulation while concocting the 4 bottles of level 20 liquid. Although this wave of heavenly tribulation was an immortal level great tribulation and was likely to be stronger, Yi Xian still didn't take it to heart. In fact, he even hoped that the power of this great heavenly tribulation would be a little stronger. Because of this, it also meant that the benefits Yi Xian would receive after transcending this heavenly tribulation would be even greater. Gotcha! At this moment, the tribulation clouds high above his head were so thick that they couldn't be dispersed. As Yi Xian looked up, an incomparably clear and loud cracking sound rang out. The universe void within a radius of 1,000,000 miles was illuminated. A huge bolt of lightning came crashing down. Good one. At this moment, Yi Xian was surging with excitement. With a loud roar, he didn't dodge. Instead, he shot straight up and rushed towards the huge bolt of lightning crashing down on his head. At the same time, in another direction that was across mulberry tree from Yi Xian's heavenly tribulation, close to 20 million miles away, a huge army of dire beasts was rushing in this direction at extreme speed. This army of dire beasts came from the forbidden space tens of millions of miles away in this direction. Because Yi Xian had concocted the level 20 liquid and attracted the liquid tribulation, it attracted the attention of 2 powerful immortal level dire beasts in this forbidden space. In the eyes of these 2 powerful immortal level dire beasts, for such an aura of heavenly tribulation to appear in this region of space 4 times in a row, there must be some kind of precious treasure that was about to appear. In order to seize the treasure, the 2 immortal level dire beasts immediately led a powerful dire beast army and rushed over. Chapter 4182. The overall strength of this beast army was very strong. Other than the 2 immortal level beasts at the front, there were more than 20 universe level beasts, close to 100 sector lord level beasts, and even more domain lords and star lords below sector lord level. Although the entire beast army only had a total of 1,000,000 beasts, it was enough to easily kill the tens of millions of primordial survivors on Sangji Star more than 100 times over. In fact, this wasn't the full strength of this forbidden land. It was no wonder that the tens of millions of survivors of the primordial era on Mulberry G Star had never been able to charge out from this direction and venture into the wider universe. Of course, it was the same for the other directions. Although Yi Xian had previously told a dozen or so realm lord old monsters not to follow him outside of Mulberry Star's atmosphere, to them, it was a rare opportunity to see a heavenly tribulation realm expert undergo heavenly tribulation. It was rare for them to encounter such an opportunity in 1,000 years. Therefore, after Yi Xian left, the dozen or so realm lord old monsters all rushed out of the atmosphere of Mulberry Star. However, they didn't follow too closely. They stayed above the atmosphere and watched from afar as Yi Xian underwent his heavenly tribulation nearly 10 million kilometers away. And on the other side of Shangji Star, the terrifyingly powerful beast army sped up again after sensing the heaven's tribulation aura. They were closing in at full speed. The entire beast army was extremely elite. Although 1,000,000 beasts wasn't a lot, the weakest of them was around the mystic light realm. For the survivors of the primordial era on Mulberry Tree, an army of vicious beasts of this level could already be considered extravagant. Naturally, the speed at which they attacked was extremely fast. Roar. Screech. In less than half a cup of tea's time, in the distant void on the other side of Shangji Star, there was suddenly a series of shocking roars and howls of ferocious beasts. The entire army of ferocious beasts had already rushed to a position only 10 million miles away from Shangji Star. At this speed, this powerful army of ferocious beasts with more than 1,000,000 ferocious beasts would trample on Mulberry Planet in less than 5 minutes, completely destroying this entire planet with life. The tens of millions of survivors of the primordial era on Mulberry Tree had probably never imagined that a life and death crisis for the survival of their race would actually arrive so quickly and without the slightest warning. What's going on? Where did the roars of beasts come from? And why are they so shocking? This old man suddenly has a bad feeling. Heavens, look, 10 million miles behind us, there's a beast army of at least 1,000,000 beasts rushing over. The two giant beasts leading them. It's over, they're two heavens tribulation realm beasts. Calamity is coming. The heavens are destroying our Shangji Star survivors. As the roars of beasts came from the distant void, outside the atmosphere of this side of Shangji Planet, the dozen sector lord old monsters that represented the strongest fighting force of Shangji Planet quickly extended their consciousness towards the direction of the roars. In the next instant, cries of alarm rang out from their mouths. Far away in the void on the other side of Mulberry Tree, the terrifyingly powerful army of vicious beasts had already charged into the void of the universe only a few million kilometers away from Mulberry Tree. Although it wasn't too close, it wasn't too far either. At least, with their divine senses as sector lords, they could clearly sense it. Ignoring the fact that the weakest of the beast army was at the mystic light realm or above, just the two immortal rank beasts at the front of the beast army was enough to instantly destroy the last shred of hope in the hearts of these dozen or so sector lords. They didn't even think of asking Yi Xian for help. Because they knew that, not to mention that they had met this senior Qiao Feng by chance and had no relationship with him at all, it was impossible for him to risk his life against a never-wither realm ferocious beast for the sake of the tens of millions of survivors on Mulberry Star. Taking a step back, even if the other party was willing, there was no way they could win this battle. On Senior Qiao Feng's side, there was only one person, and he had just stepped into this realm. On the other side of Shangji Star, in the void of the universe, there was an army of millions of ferocious beasts, and the leaders were two powerful immortal rank ferocious beasts. Not to mention, behind these two immortal rank beasts, there were more than 20 universe-level beasts. These 20 universe-level beasts were basically comparable to an immortal rank being. Furthermore, in the space 10 million miles away from Shangji Star, Senior Qiao Feng hadn't even finished his heaven's tribulation. Even if he wanted to risk his life to save them, the heaven's tribulation hadn't ended, so he probably didn't have the strength. In fact, it could be said that he couldn't even protect himself right now, because the moment he was undergoing his heaven's tribulation, he would be harassed by immortal rank beasts of the same realm. The consequences would be extremely severe. It was very likely that he would die here. Thinking of this, the dozen or so sector lords exchanged glances, despair appearing on their faces. However, in the end, they nodded resolutely at the same time. A few of them immediately rushed towards the area where Yi Xian was undergoing his heaven's tribulation. We can't escape this calamity. This time, the tens of millions of survivors on Shangji Star are destined to be annihilated. As the few sector lords shot over, they warned Yi Xian, Senior, we are willing to self-destruct and help you block the last few waves of heaven's tribulation to help you escape. We only hope that if there is a chance in the future, you can help us kill this army of beasts for our thousands of survivors and take revenge for our annihilation. These few sector lords were actually willing to give up their chance to escape when they knew that they were going to die. They were willing to self-destruct to help Yi Xian block the last few waves of heaven's tribulation and use this to seek a chance in the future, to take revenge for the annihilation of their race. This kind of decisiveness, even Yi Xian couldn't help but be moved. Even if they didn't make this choice, facing that powerful army of beasts with 2 immortal rank beasts, these few sector lords who were prepared to self-destruct basically wouldn't be able to survive in the end. However, they had the intention to help Yi Xian escape as soon as possible, instead of relying on the little bit of faith they had before to beg him to save them. Just this alone could be considered generous. What Yi Xian didn't want to owe the most was a debt of gratitude. Facing this kind of situation, even if he didn't want to help, he had to. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to live in peace. In truth, the thought of not making a move had never crossed his mind. After all, the 2 ferocious sempiternal realm ferocious beasts were only at the 2nd or 3rd level of the sempiternal realm. In his opinion, they could not be considered as powerful at all. Chapter 4183. Apart from the 8 great guardian warriors, there were currently 3 other people in the farmer god Cauldron's inner space. All of them were locked in cages at the bottom of the central domain volcano. One of them was Shi Wanjin. He was originally a cripple, and even the Heaven and Earth Tao Foundation had been snatched away. However, due to various unforeseen events, his physique had undergone a huge change because of his destruction. Even Yi Xian wasn't sure what he had become. Shi Wanjin's aura had stabilized, and the changes in his constitution seemed to have entered the final stage. From time to time, all kinds of strange auras would be emitted. It was like the innate thunder calamity constitution or the innate poison constitution. In short, it was so strange that even Yi Xian felt his scalp go numb. Fortunately, no matter how monstrous this guy's constitution changes were, he was still Yi Xian's servant. This was a fact that could not be changed. However, Shi Wanjin had not awakened yet, but he would wake up soon. Apart from Shi Wanjin, there were 2 other figures in the cages at the bottom of the central domain volcano in the farmer god Cauldron. One of them was the flying centipede, a level 6 immortal realm being who had been captured by Yi Xian, sucked dry of the poison in his body, and thrown into the central domain volcano half-dead. His strength had recovered. However, he was sealed by the power of the farmer god Cauldron's domain and could not escape. He had lost his temper long ago. The other one was the half-rotten ancestor of the Enji clan from the 2nd universe, who had been captured during the battle in the demon domain of the 1st universe. He was originally a level 9 perfect universe being. However, during this period of time, he had been cultivating in the cages at the bottom of the central domain volcano in the cauldron. The spiritual energy in the cauldron was originally much higher than the outside world. In addition, Yi Xian often used the farmer god's strange flame, so there would occasionally be some energy floating around the bottom of the central domain volcano. Some of it would be absorbed by him. In addition, the flying centipede had given him pointers when he was bored. After a period of polishing, this old fellow had successfully broken through and entered the immortal realm, becoming a level 1 immortal realm old monster. In other words, there were now a total of 2 immortal realm old monsters in Yi Xian's farmer god Cauldron. Furthermore, these 2 immortal realm old monsters had basically been subdued by him. They were just short of formally submitting and bowing their heads. The ferocious beast army that was advancing was comparable to 3 immortal realm old monsters, 2 level 2 and level 3 immortal realm beasts, as well as more than 20 universe realm beasts. However, as long as the flying centipede from the central domain volcano, they would definitely crush the ferocious beast army. The flying centipede's cultivation base was already close to the late-stage sempiternal realm. He had already entered the 6th order sempiternal realm many years ago. Just by himself, he could easily crush the 2 second order and 3rd order sempiternal realm ferocious beasts. Although the remaining 20 universe-grade ferocious beasts were equivalent to an immortal realm old monster in terms of combat strength, that was only equivalent. Without reaching the immortal realm, no matter how many universe old monsters there were, they would still be defeated one by one. As for the sector lords, domain lords, and star lords below the universe grade, there was an army of close to 1 million beasts. Even the 20 universe-grade beasts and 2 immortal-grade beasts had been killed. Would they dare to jump around? This was also the reason why Yi Xian didn't plan to personally take action, and didn't even plan to use the giant fortress of life he brought this time. Instead, he only sent his spiritual sense into the Shinong cauldron at the critical moment and directly entered the bottom of the central domain volcano. The flying centipede and old monster silver pole had been imprisoned here for quite some time. Now, it was finally time for them to submit. At this time, although Yi Xian had not finished his immortal great heavenly tribulation, and there were still 3 or 4 waves of tribulation lightning left, his cultivation strength had already officially stepped into the immortal realm. This was something that both the flying centipede and old monster silver Ji could clearly sense. Therefore, when Yi Xian's spiritual sense clone entered the central domain volcano and appeared in front of the 2 old guys, they were stunned at first. Then, their expressions instantly became strange. During the time when they were imprisoned at the bottom of the central domain volcano, they would occasionally see Yi Xian enter the space inside the cauldron. Each time, Yi Xian's cultivation strength would be different. They didn't expect that this time, he would actually directly soar to the immortal realm. From the looks of it, with this speed, perhaps it wouldn't be too surprising for him to directly become an immortal marquis. At this thought, the flying centipede and old monster silver pole, who were already not very angry, became even more speechless. After exchanging glances, they sighed almost at the same time. They had no choice but to submit to this abnormal existence in front of them, who was one of the 7 great monsters. At the same time, a kind of rejoicing subconsciously emerged from the bottom of his heart. Perhaps, by following such a peerless monster that had never been seen before, his path of cultivation in the future could more or less be touched by some of his characteristics, and become a little faster. If that was really the case, even if they had to submit, there was nothing that they couldn't accept. Unknowingly, the last bit of unwillingness in the 2 old guys' hearts completely vanished. These psychological changes were clearly reflected in their eyes. Yi Xian took everything into his eyes. Only then did he say indifferently, "The 2 of you have been staying at the bottom of the central domain volcano in the cauldron space for so long that you're about to become old foxes, aren't you?" These words were really blunt. The flying centipede and old monster silver pole were stunned at first. Then, they exchanged glances again, and their faces turned red from embarrassment. This isn't a place for idlers. Now, I'll give you 2 a chance. Either you surrender, or I'll roast you. Speaking of this, Yi Xian rolled his eyes and continued, "Outside, I've run into a little trouble, but I'm undergoing the immortal great heavenly tribulation, so I don't have time to deal with it. My original intention was to ask the 2 of you to go out and be my best fighters to solve the problem. Of course, if you're not willing, just tell me directly. I won't make things difficult for you." However, as long as they weren't idiots, they would be able to guess what he was going to say next. The flying centipede and old monster silver pole exchanged glances again and sighed faintly at the same time. They cupped their hands and said in unison, "We're willing. You should have said so earlier. You made me pretend for so long." Yi Xian was secretly delighted, but he rolled his eyes again. "If that's the case, hurry up and make a Dao oath. Trying to bluff your way out of this won't work with me." Chapter 4184. Roar. Roar. As Yi Xian took out the Shinong cauldron, it shrank to a size of only 10,000 feet and appeared in the void of the universe beside him. In an instant, 2 figures rushed out of the cauldron, accompanied by a high-pitched roar and a clear cry that pierced the clouds. They appeared out of nowhere. The 2 figures rushed out from the mouth of the Shinong cauldron that was filled with 9-colored fog. At first, they were only 1,000 feet tall, and the cultivation aura in their bodies was even more restrained, so it was not clear. But soon, as they rushed out of the cauldron one after another, their bodies expanded with the wind. In less than a breath's time, they had all expanded to 10,000 feet tall. As for the cultivation aura in their bodies, it instantly spread out. They were all in the immortal realm, which was what the survivors of the primordial era called the heavenly tribulation realm. These 2 immortal realm old monsters were the flying centipede and old ancestor Inji, who had just surrendered to Yi Xian and swore their loyalty to him. One of them was at the peak of the middle stage of the immortal realm. The other one was a level 1 sempiternal realm expert who had just entered this realm. Although there were only 2 of them, with the flying centipede's terrifying cultivation that was about to step into the late stage of the immortal realm, the two of them together were more than enough to crush the army of millions of ferocious beasts that were coming from the other side of Mulberry Tree. At this moment, after rushing out of the Shinnon Cauldron, the two Immortal Realm old monsters fully activated their cultivation, and their bodies had already expanded to the limit. A flying centipede that was 10,000 feet tall was completely black. It had an uncountable number of limbs on both sides of its long and narrow body. On its back, there were several pairs of huge black translucent wings. As it slowly flapped, a large amount of black poisonous fog gushed out from the countless small holes on the surface of the flying centipede's body. In less than 3 breaths, it had completely enveloped its body. As for old Freak Inji, who followed closely behind them, his entire body glowed with silver radiance. Every single feather seemed to be suffused with a dazzling metallic sheen, and it was obvious with a single glance that they were definitely peerlessly sharp. These silver feathers were the natural weapons of the Silver Wing clan. Once they spread their wings and shot out in a great battle, they would be able to pierce through gold and crack rocks from all directions. They would definitely be able to cause their opponents to have an incomparable headache and retreat in panic. At this moment, with the sudden appearance of the flying centipede and old monster Silver G without any warning, the dozen or so Realm Lord old monsters outside Mulberry Star's atmosphere instantly cried out in alarm. Even the few Realm Lord old monsters who were originally charging towards Yi Xian and clamoring to sacrifice themselves for him were scared witless. With a shiver, he turned around and fled back into the void. 2 Immortal Realm old monsters. Even if it was just the aura of cultivation from their bodies, it was enough to scare them to death. Heavens, where did these 2 heavenly tribulation experts come from? They seem to have rushed out of that giant cauldron, and that giant cauldron seems to have been summoned by Senior Qiao Feng with a wave of his hand. Could it be? Heavens, could these 2 supreme heavenly tribulation beasts have been raised or subdued by Senior Qiao Feng? He was clearly only at the Mahayana realm before, and now he is still undergoing the great heavenly tribulation of the heavenly tribulation realm. How could he have subdued 2 supreme ferocious beasts that surpass his strength? Especially that heavenly tribulation centipede whose entire body is shrouded in black poisonous fog. Judging from the aura emanating from its body, it is clearly at the peak of the middle stage of this realm and can step into the late stage at any time. Such a cultivation is simply terrifying. Even the strongest ferocious beasts in the few great starry sky despairs around Mulberry G Star are only slightly stronger. Ming, screech. Fierce roars and clear cries rang out once again. The tens of thousands of feet tall flying centipede and old freak Silver G directly flew across Mulberry G planet. Their bodies transformed into extremely fast shooting arrows as they brazenly charged towards the army of 1 million ferocious beasts, which had already arrived tens of thousands of miles away. The 2 Immortal Realm ferocious beasts at the front of this army were both at the 2nd or 3rd stage of the Immortal Realm. One of them was a unicorn rhinoceros, and the other was an ironback mountain armadillo. Its body was like a crocodile, yet it wasn't as ferocious as the colossal crocodile. At this moment, these 2 Immortal Realm ferocious beast leaders suddenly noticed that 2 ferocious beasts of the same level had actually charged over from the space opposite the star before them. Even though one of them was only at the 1st stage of this realm, the other emitted an aura that was clearly at the 6th stage of this realm, and it was only a step away from the late stage of the 7th stage. Because it was only a fine line away. Moreover, this strange ferocious beast at the 6th stage of the heavenly tribulation realm was clearly a poisonous beast. Its entire body was enveloped in a black poisonous mist that could be said to be boundless. Its violent and monstrous aura caused one's scalp to immediately go numb just by looking at it. Without a doubt, they had encountered a tough opponent this time. These 2 ferocious beasts at the heavenly tribulation realm that were charging over clearly weren't here to show goodwill. The violent aura around them was extremely heavy, and their killing intent shook the heavens. With a single glance, one could tell that they weren't masters to be trifled with. Roar! Roar! Amidst their shock, the unicorn rhinoceros and ironback mountain armadillo subconsciously roared furiously. Even though their roars shook the heavens and earth, it clearly revealed a strong feeling of being fierce on the outside but weak on the inside. Without a doubt, facing a poisonous ferocious beast at the 6th stage of the heavenly tribulation realm, the 2 of them were already afraid. the great battle began almost instantly. The roars of the unicorn rhinoceros and ironback mountain armadillo made the flying centipede and old monster Silver G feel provoked. The two immortal old monsters immediately responded in an extremely domineering manner. Before their violent roars had even faded away, they had already collided head-on with each other. Old monster Silver G didn't stop at all. As his pair of huge silver wings that were more than 20,000 feet long flapped, his figure instantly charged into the center of the million-strong army. With just a flap of his wings, countless ferocious beasts with weaker cultivation bases were directly sent flying backward in the void while screaming like gourds rolling on the ground. Some of them even directly exploded and died because they couldn't withstand old monster Silver G's immortal pressure. From the very beginning, the battle had entered a white-hot climax. Huge blood flowers exploded in the void and were blown away by the wind. Within a radius of 1,000 miles, there was a thick smell of blood. As for the leaders of this army of ferocious beasts, the unicorn rhinoceros and ironback mountain armadillo, whose cultivation bases had also reached the immortal realm, had no intention of splitting up to fight. As soon as the battle began, the two leaders of the ferocious beasts at the early stage of the immortal realm entangled the flying centipede's body from both sides. They didn't dare to get close to the flying centipede at all. They were looking for an opportunity to launch a sneak attack. Unfortunately, such a tactic was completely useless against a powerful poisonous beast like the flying centipede. As the battle became more and more intense, the black poisonous fog that had originally enveloped the entire body of the flying centipede unknowingly spread out due to the surging energy and strength chi. After a cup of tea's time, the single-horned rhinoceros and the ironback diamond armadillo that were fighting with him had already sunk into a canopy. Within the faint poisonous fog. Chapter 4185. Roar. Roar, furious roars filled with fear and unwillingness came from the mouths of the two immortal beasts, the unicorn rhinoceros and the ironback mountain armadillo. Vaguely, there was even a touch of despair rapidly spreading in these two roars. Only 10 minutes had passed since the battle started, but the unicorn rhinoceros and the ironback mountain armadillo were too careless. They had no idea how strong the poison of the black fog in the flying centipede's body was. This directly led to their tragic end and ending. In a short period of time, the power in the bodies of these two immortal rank fierce beasts fell into complete chaos because they had absorbed too much black poisonous fog. Under the chain reaction, even their huge bodies were visibly stiff. Rip. A slightly muffled sound of ripping silk could be heard. The flying centipede's ferocious nature erupted at this moment. Its figure charged out from the black poisonous fog that enveloped its entire body. Countless limbs extended and hooked into the unicorn rhinoceros's flesh. With a violent tug, it actually tore this immortal rank ferocious beast apart. They were cut in half, and blood rained down from the sky. This scene was witnessed by the many indigenous survivors thousands of miles away in the atmosphere of Mulberry G star. It instantly caused a large wave of gasps like a tide. The dozen or so core higher-ups of the 12 tribes were stunned for a moment, and then they beat their chests and stamped their feet in the void. In their view, this unicorn rhinoceros with a supreme cultivation base of heavenly tribulation realm was simply a treasure. If it could be used to refine flesh and blood medicine, who knew how many primordial survivors in the tribe would benefit from it, and their cultivation base and strength would soar. But now, although the remains of this supreme heavenly tribulation realm beast were still there, after being torn apart by the ferocious flying centipede, it was thrown into the void and abandoned as if it was garbage. Later on, they still had a chance to collect it back. However, there was no doubt that too much of the heavenly tribulation blood in its body had been lost because of this. The 12 tribes on Mulberry G planet had not obtained a single drop of the blood of such a peerless ferocious beast in the past countless years. Yet now, as they watched them wantonly being wasted like a boundless rainstorm in the void of the universe that was a myriad of kilometers away. This scene had already caused the eyes of everyone to turn red, and their hearts ached to the point even their livers were faintly trembling. Fellow Taoist, let's talk things over calmly. Don't be impulsive. Is there some misunderstanding here? However, after trembling all over, it finally lost its will to fight. It began to beg for mercy. Although it was a ferocious beast, its life level had evolved to the immortal realm, so it had no problem speaking human language. Moreover, although it was known as the Ironback Mountain Armadillo, at this moment, it absolutely did not think that its so-called iron back was more resistant to tearing than the unicorn rhinoceros. If the unicorn rhinoceros really rushed over, it would definitely die. Misunderstanding? You should tell this to my boss. I don't care about this nonsense. If my boss says he wants to kill you, then he must kill you. Screech. In the face of the unicorn rhinoceros's pleas, the flying centipede did not intend to give it any face at all. It casually replied with a ferocious tone, but its body did not stop at all. In an instant, it shot out again, and in the blink of an eye, it was in front of the trembling Ironback Mountain Armadillo. On both sides of its huge and long body, countless limbs suddenly opened at this moment, and directly buckled into the Ironback Mountain Armadillo's flesh. What happened next was no suspense. The Ironback Mountain Armadillo's desperate and unwilling howl resounded in the void, followed by a dull tearing sound followed by a series of strange splashing sounds. This was the sound of the precious blood in the Ironback Mountain Armadillo rushing out and dissolving in the void. This was the movement caused by the majestic rain of blood. After doing all that, the flying centipede didn't hesitate at all. It simply threw the remains of the Ironback Mountain crushing armadillo into the air, and with a leap, it charged into the million-strong army of beasts that was already in a mess. There was no need to describe the next scene in detail. Two immortal-level beasts rushed into an army of millions of beasts, whose strongest combat strength was only at the universe grade. What could happen and what could happen would be a one-sided crushing and slaughter. There was no other scene at all, on the other side, outside Mulberry Star's atmosphere. The powerhouses of the various tribes on Mulberry Star who had heard the news were already completely petrified. Previously, when the flying centipede had torn the unicorn rhinoceros in half, they had all gasped in horror and shock. However, now, when the flying centipede swayed and tore another tribulation-grade beast in half in the blink of an eye, these people of the primordial era were stunned. The only feeling left in the hearts of these powerhouses was numbness. The dozen or so sector lord old monsters who represented the core authority of the 12 major tribes of Mulberry Star also pounded their chests and stomped their feet with pained expressions when they saw another heavenly tribulation realm's supreme ferocious beast flying into the sky. Then, they subconsciously looked behind them at Yi Xian, who was thousands of miles away in the void, and muttered softly, revealing extreme helplessness. Did you hear that? What did this ferocious tribulation centipede just say? Boss? He said boss. That's right, this old man heard it too. Obviously, the boss he was talking about is none other than Senior Qiao Feng, who is still undergoing the Great Tribulation. What a monster. He has just transcended the Great Tribulation, but before that, he casually ordered 2 tribulation-grade underlings to go out and fight. One of them is actually at the peak of the middle stage of the tribulation grade, only a fine line away from the late stage of the tribulation grade. This is a great Buddha. We must take good care of it. If there is no accident, this opportunity will be unprecedented for the 12 tribes of our Mulberry Star. Perhaps, our entire tribe will be able to walk out of this narrow world that has been sealed invisibly because of this. Who knows? Look, Senior Qiao Feng's Great Tribulation has been successfully completed. The last tribulation lightning has just struck, and Senior is safe and sound. There is no suspense in the battle here. Pass down the order to the children of the various tribes to rush out of the atmosphere and prepare to clean up the mess and collect the spoils of war. As for us, it's time to congratulate Senior Qiao Feng for successfully transcending the tribulation. Chapter 4186. Rumble. Kacha, after the earth-shattering explosion of thunder, a clear sound of lightning rang out. A bolt of lightning that was over 3 meters thick instantly smashed down and landed on Yi Xian's body. Unfortunately, even tribulation lightning and lightning of this level were unable to cause much harm to him who'd always been on the path of body refinement and whose body had been tempered to the point of being terrifying. On the contrary, the immortal realm cultivation in his body had improved a lot after he had consolidated it. When the thick black tribulation clouds in the distant sky above his head dispersed, Lin Xian waved his hand. The clothes on his body, which had been destroyed by the tribulation lightning, instantly looked brand new. At this moment, the familiar sound of the system notification rang out in his mind. Ding! Congratulations to the host for making a breakthrough in the realm of the ancient Dongshu formula. Current realm, level 2 of the immortal realm. Ding! Congratulations to the host for making a breakthrough in the realm of the body's chi and blood. Current realm, level 2 of the immortal realm. This time, not only did the great heavenly tribulation of the immortal stage not cause the slightest bit of damage to his original body, it even caused the remaining level 20 liquid in his body and the medicinal effects of various top-notch heavenly and earthly treasures to completely evaporate, directly causing Yi Xian's cultivation to break through another small level. Before this, his body's strength was at level 1 of the immortal realm. Once he activated the bloodline of the ancient ape demons with 3 heads and 6 arms, his strength soared to level 2 of the immortal realm. If he used the 9 changes of the demonic ape and reached the 5th change, he would instantly reach level 7 of the immortal realm. Now, with another breakthrough in his cultivation, once Yi Xian activated the bloodline of the ancient ape in his body and entered the 5th change of the demonic ape, his combat strength would reach level 8 of the immortal realm. He would only be 2 levels away from the marquee immortal realm. I've finally entered the immortal realm. I've successfully crossed the first 2 hurdles on the path of cultivation of the starry sky. Yi Xian clenched his fists tightly. He suddenly felt a sense of heroism that he had never felt before. Looking back on what he had experienced along the way, he couldn't help but sigh. However, this is only a starting point. Taking a deep breath, a bright light flashed in his eyes. In an instant, an incomparably heavy sense of urgency appeared in his heart. Even the expression on his face immediately became dignified. He murmured, "Today, all the races and forces in the 3 main planes of the starry skies are facing an unprecedented test. The great desolate world, which has been destroyed for countless years, may descend at any time. Under such circumstances, the strength of one's own body has become meaningless. Although I don't have a bloodline clan behind me, I have a group of subordinates who have been with me for a long time. No matter what, I have to use all of their cultivation and strength before the great desolate world descends. It can be improved." At this point, Yi Xian didn't say anything else. He turned his head and glanced in the direction of Sangji Star. His eyes flashed with a bright light. After pondering for a moment, he finally seemed to have made a great decision. He gritted his teeth and waved his hand. Rumble. With a wave of his hand, an oblate object that was like a small star instantly appeared in the void of space beside Yi Xian without any warning, causing the dozen or so realm lord old monsters of Mulberry Tree, who were originally rushing in this direction, to tremble in fear. It was almost as if they were trembling. As if by conditioned reflex, they all retreated in horror. The enormous object that Yi Xian took out from the undying world in his body was none other than the one that had just completed a transformation and evolution not long ago, the giant fortress of life. This giant fortress of life only had a diameter of 100,000 meters before, but now it had grown to more than 160,000 meters, which was 500,000 meters. If converted to kilometers, it would be 500 kilometers. It was like a miniature star. This terrifying size wasn't much different from the Heaven's Legacy race's headquarters, Heaven's Legacy City. It was absolutely shocking. Even its shape had changed from a spherical shape to an oblate shape, which was more suitable for traveling through the cosmos at a faster speed. In addition, compared to the last evolution not long ago, in addition to the size of the giant life fortress being many times larger, the space inside had also been significantly improved due to the use of the space folding technology. The interior of the giant fortress of life was extremely wide. It was like an independent paradise with mountains and rivers. It didn't look like the interior of a giant fortress at all. This was only one layer of the giant fortress of life. The entire giant fortress of life had a total of 18 layers. Each layer had different sceneries and different functions. However, apart from the 1 million large and small fortresses controlled by countless intelligent robots, there were only 20,000 demon scouts led by Gui Haidao and Sang Qingyu. Of course, among these 20,000 demon scouts, the group of elders who had followed Yi Xian the earliest, such as Naboshan, Ba Chai, Li Mosquito, Zhuo Fengtai, and the others, had all shamelessly mixed in with the two 10,000-strong scout troops in order to be able to fight alongside Yi Xian. Even the machine race's Ying Tai was among them. Although these people were the earliest group of elders to follow Yi Xian, they had been left behind by Yi Xian in the Death Star Field's Triumph City in the Third Universe. Although their cultivation and strength improved very quickly, compared to following Yi Xian and obtaining all kinds of opportunities, this speed was obviously slower. It was much, much slower. Now, Yi Xian's cultivation and strength had reached the immortal realm, while the strongest among these 20,000 demon scouts was only at the universe realm, the 15th great realm of the starry sky. There wasn't even a Star Lord old monster. If this situation continued, then for Yi Xian, whose cultivation was getting stronger and stronger, these old subordinates of his who followed him from the beginning probably wouldn't be of any use to him very soon. Therefore, one of the reasons he had brought Gui Haidao, Zhang Qingyu, and the others out this time was to improve their cultivation and strength as soon as possible. Not just one or two, but the overall strength of these 20,000 demon scouts would increase greatly. Yi Xian had originally thought that this opportunity would come by chance. After all, it wasn't just increasing the strength of one or two people. 20,000 demon scouts was really a large number. However, from the looks of it now, this opportunity had clearly arrived.